Good evening, Alex. How are you?
Good evening. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
I have started the recording just to make sure that if you were an attendee, that we could let you in, but I'm happy you're able to join as a panelist.
Okay, great. Do you think we're ready to go?
Yes, I see some attendees in person and then also attendees online as well.
Okay. And Ms. Burgess, good evening. Are you here on behalf of the applicant?
Good evening, Examiner Scheidmeyer. Yes, I am here on behalf of the applicant, although Jeff Pantier and his team at Hatton Godat Pantier are going to be leading the applicant's presentation tonight. So I
Okay.
will not have a active speaking role unless that becomes necessary.
All
Thank
right.
you.
I understand, thank you. And Alex, did you say that we are currently being recorded?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so let's get underway. Good afternoon or good evening. Mark Scheifmeyer, the city's hearing examiner. I've been asked to convene a public hearing to consider an application for phase preliminary plat approval for a project referred to as the Vista Views at Black Lake. It bears the city's application number TUM-24-1446. Again, proposing phase preliminary plat development of 54 and plus acres into 184 single-family residential units, along with other site improvements. In advance of today's hearing, I have received staff report authored by Mr. Brook, who is present, along with a host of other materials. I have reviewed all of those materials thoroughly and more than once, and I am very familiar with all of the materials, including the rather extensive expert discussions on wetland and related issues. Again, having reviewed all of those multiple times and all public comments multiple times as well. The purpose of tonight's hearing is threefold. It's to hear from city staff regarding this application and its recommendations and any conditions it may impose if it recommends approval of the application, followed then by an opportunity for the applicant to respond to the city's position, either adding to or subtracting from the things that have been suggested by city staff, followed then by an opportunity for public comment. It's unclear on a remote hearing such as this just how many members of the public are present, and therefore, out of some measure of caution, I'm going to impose a 5-minute limit on public comment per person, which is actually quite long, but it should be short enough that if there are quite a few members of the public wishing to be heard, that those who are waiting to testify aren't waiting too unnecessarily long. A few other general comments about testimony tonight. All those who testify, including city staff, as well as from the applicant, and of course, members of the public, will do so under oath. And you'll do so in a way in which your testimony can be memorialized so that anyone who feels aggrieved by my decision has a full record to submit to the Thurston County Superior Court for review. The only other points I would make is a reminder to all that this is a fact-finding hearing, which is a little bit different than saying appearing before city council. I am strictly regulated by the facts I receive through one form of testimony or another. I am not to consider opinions. I'm only to consider facts. And so simply testifying that you're supportive of the application or that you're in opposition, but not telling me why you might be one or the other, isn't doing me much favor. I'm not conducting a popularity contest. I am not counting those who support an application and how many who are not favoring it. Rather, I'm just considering carefully all of the facts I received through one source or another. And once having considered all of those facts, rendering a decision consistent with the Tumwater development regulations and the Tumwater City comprehensive plan. So with those things in mind, let us get underway so that we're not at this too long into the evening. We'll begin by testimony from city staff, and that's Mr. Baruch. So Mr. Baruch, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I should note for the record also that two things, two reminders I received from city staff moments earlier or sometime earlier today. One is that there is a small error in the staff report as to the number of phases that this project proposes. Early in the staff report, it mentions 2 phases and later mentions 3. I've been reminded or advised that the correct number is 3, not the 2 referenced on page 1 of the staff report. I'm also advised that the city, in conjunction with the applicant, recommend a modification to propose condition 45 relating to a left turn lane into the project from 49th. So I'll just make note of those 2 late minute adjustments to the staff report. With that in mind, Mr. Pruk, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Before you is a request to subdivide 2 properties totaling approximately 54 acres into 184 single-family lots through the phased preliminary plat process. The process is also requesting an infrastructure, the applicant is also requesting an infrastructure exception to construct utilities adjacent to critical areas and critical area buffers. Both the preliminary plat and infrastructure exception require hearing examiner review and approval if all of the criteria have been met. The property is located at 3717 49th Ave and 3825 58th Lane and is zoned single-family low-density residential. The properties are mostly flat with a decrease in elevation to Wetland A to the northwest and an increase in elevation to the east. The property has historically been used to raise cattle and has a few outbuildings and a home on the property. Surrounding properties are zoned single-family low density with parcels zoned multifamily medium, single-family medium, and neighborhood commercial to the west and northwest. The subdivision is proposed to be developed in 3 phases, as you mentioned, with 103 lots in the first phase, 47 lots in the second phase, and 34 lots in the third phase. Frontage improvements, infrastructure extension, traffic improvements, safe routes to school path, stormwater, open space, and wetland mitigation would be required with the first phase of construction. Phase 2 and 3 will include surrounding streets and infrastructure associated with those portions of the development internal to the subdivision. Moving to the regulatory framework, the preliminary plat application was submitted and subsequently a notice of application was issued on October 18th, 2024. During the notice of application comment period, the Nisqually Indian Tribe, Squaxin Island Tribe, Department of Ecology and Historic Preservation, Thurston County, and several community members commented on the project. The tribes and DAHP requested a cultural resource study be completed prior to issuance of any grading work on the property. Condition 8 was included in response to their comments. Community comments related to school pedestrian connections, pickup and drop off at school, density, open space, stormwater drainage, utility connections, transportation impacts, emergency service impacts, best planning practices, and wetland impacts were all addressed as a part of staff and the applicant's responses, which were included in Exhibit 9. Concurrently, the project was reviewed by the City of Tumwater Transportation Manager, who provided a transportation concurrency ruling, which stated that trips were proposed to be sent through the Tumwater Boulevard I-5 interchange, which will require payment of mitigation fees or construction of the required interchange improvements. Additionally, improvements to the intersection of Black Lake Belmore Road and Black Lake Boulevard Southwest were identified as the project created failing movements at that intersection. The city reviewed a SEPA environmental checklist and other information submitted by the applicant. A mitigated determination of non-significance was issued on December 20th, 2024, and no appeals of the SEPA threshold determination were filed. During the SEPA comment period, the Olympia Regional Clean Air Agency made comments on the requirements for construction, dust, and demolition permits as it relates to the need for asbestos surveys. The Washington State Department of Ecology commented on the application with some specific comments related to elements of construction activities and critical area review. The applicant and the applicant consultant have responded to the Department of Ecology's concerns in a series of emails and response letters. The Department of Ecology also responded to the applicant's responses. No formal resolution to the comment had been achieved through the back and forth. Several community members also sent comments to the city about the SEPA determination. The comments included concerns about the transportation network, schools, critical area impacts, and water availability. The city responded to the different concerns, which included response letters within Exhibit 10. Lastly, a public hearing notice was sent out on January 17th, 2025. Comments have been received by various members of the public and have been included as updated Exhibit 11. Just one note there, we have received an additional public comment just this afternoon, late in the afternoon, which I'll forward after the hearing to the applicants and to the hearing examiner, just to make sure the record is complete. Notices for all three processes were mailed to property owners within 300 feet of the subject property and various agencies, posted on site and published in the Olympian. Various studies were provided by the applicant regarding environmental elements to the site. Staff reviewed the critical area reports, which included an evaluation of the wetland regulations, impacts to wetlands, and wetland infrastructure exception. 3 wetlands were identified on site. Wetland A is a large Category 2 wetland in the northwest portion of the property, which has a 150-foot buffer that can be reduced to 110 feet by meeting specific criteria in the ordinance. Wetlands B and C are located in the middle of the site and were classified as Category 4 wetlands with 50-foot buffers that could be reduced to 40 feet by meeting certain required criteria as well. This development proposes to remove two smaller wetlands, which can be allowed when following the Tumwater Municipal Code requirements in 1628-095. The wetland report for this project details the small wetland standards and wetland biologist responses to each of those required criteria under Exhibit 12, Section 4.2 of the report, along with Exhibits 10S and 10T. After review of the wetland reports and additional documentation provided by the applicant, staff agrees with the findings and the mitigation proposed. Additionally, a wetland infrastructure exception is being proposed to install frontage improvements and infrastructure along the frontage of 49th Ave and sewer pump station adjacent to Black Lake Belmore Road Southwest. This infrastructure would impact wetland A on the north and west side of the wetland. This infrastructure is in line with the city's transportation comprehensive plan and sewer and water plans for this area of the city. And with the proposed mitigation plans proposed in the wetland pump station report, staff recommends approval of the infrastructure exception. The geographic area of the subject property shows soils preferred by Mazama pocket gophers, which is listed as a protected species. Mazama pocket gopher reports dated October 2022, August 2023, and July 2024 conclude that no gopher mounds were observed on the subject property. Additionally, no Oregon spotted frog critical habitat is mapped on the subject property, and while potential Oregon spotted frog habitat occurs on wetland A, no preferred habitat occurs in wetland A according to the critical area report. A professional forester's report, including a tree inventory and tree protection plan, were submitted for review for this project. The inventory shows a total of 275 trees located on site. The Tumwater Municipal Code requires retention of 20% of the trees on site, or 12 trees per acre, whichever is greater. Retention of 12 trees per acre would require retaining 653 trees on site. Since the proposed development does not have the required amount of trees in a pre-developed state, the development will need to bring the amount of trees up to the required amount post-development. This means that 378 additional trees will need to be planted to meet the tree ordinance standards. And this will be provided as a part of the landscape plans for the subdivision. A preliminary landscape plan was provided in Exhibit 29 on Sheet 10. Moving to the zoning regulations, the property is zoned single-family low density. Single-family detached dwelling units are an allowed use within that zone district. The single-family low density zone district requires a minimum density of 4 dwelling units per acre and a maximum of 7 dwelling units per acre with the transfer of development rights from the county. The applicant is proposing 5.92 dwelling units per acre, which is under the maximum 6 dwelling units per acre without the transfer of development rights. The minimum lot size in the single-family low-density zone district is 3,200 square feet. The smallest lot proposed within the plat is 4,000 square feet. The minimum lot width is 50 feet, except for alley-loaded lots, which reduces the lot width to 40 feet. Some of the lots within the subdivision are proposed to be alley-loaded, which allows the lots to be 40 feet wide. Maximum building height is 35 feet. Front setbacks are 10 feet, side setbacks are 5 feet, and rear yard setbacks are 20 feet. The proposed homes will need to meet the design guidelines for single-family homes at the time of building permit submittal. These requirements will be reviewed during the building permit process for the homes, if approved. The minimum open space requirement is 10% of the total land area. And based on the review of the preliminary plat, it appears that the zoning criteria are met or will be reviewed during the building permit applications and complied with at that time. The Aquifer Protection Overlay District applies to this property, which restricts hazardous uses to protect aquifer recharge areas. Residential subdivisions are not a restricted land use in the Aquifer Protection Overlay. With this information, staff finds that the phase preliminary plat and infrastructure exception as conditioned conform to the comprehensive plan, Tumwater Municipal Code, planning standards, development standards, and policies of the city of Tumwater. Staff recommends approval of the phased preliminary plat and infrastructure exception with the attached conditions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Brook. I have a number. As usual, they're not well organized, so bear with me as I bounce around from topic to topic and perhaps come back to certain topics. So I won't necessarily proceeding linearly. The project, as you described, is in 3 phases. However, the site mapping that was received appears to have been done at a slightly earlier point when it was intended as 2 phases, because those show simply Division 1 and Division 2. I don't see a Division 3. At least I'm not seeing one on the site maps. And so I'm curious if you can better define the location of the 3 phases, just so I have a better sense of how this project would move across the phase.
So Exhibit 2, which is the preliminary plat, shows phase 1 as this area, pretty much lots 1 through 103. And then Division 2 is on the right side, and that is 104 through 150. And Division 3 is on the left side, 151 through 184.
Okay, that is a later version of the map I'm looking at, where what is shown there is Divisions 2 and 3 is all shown as Division 2 on the map I had in front of me. So that helps. So once again, Division 1 is the upper section.
Through this middle area.
Right, the north half, if you will. Or I guess the north end, north half.
Yeah, so the outline of the Division 2 is within this dotted line, and it's only on this right side. So there will be this public street and homes as a part of Division 1 that goes through the entire subdivision, and included within that is 58th Lane, which will be constructed and as a part of Division 1 as well.
Thank you. That does clarify. So Division 1 would run the entire north-south length of the project.
That is correct.
Okay. And then Division 2 would be the southeast.
Correct.
And Division 3 would be the southwest.
Correct.
Thank you. You mentioned that there had been no SEPA appeals. When did the SEPA appeal period expire?
Let me pull that up just to remind myself. January 10th, 2025.
And as a result of the agency and public comments to the notice of the MD&S, no changes were made to the MD&S, correct?
That's correct.
I'm a little unclear on some matters with trees, just how they're counted, and if you can help me with this. So the wetland mitigation the critical areas mitigation plan proposes collectively the planting of just under 900 cedars around Wetland A and the farm pond. While you've also noted that the tree plan requires, under the standard calculations, an additional 378 trees. Are those two numbers to be added together, or is any part of the 900 trees being planted for wetland mitigation being counted toward the 378 for tree protection?
My understanding is that the tree protection and tree planting associated with the replanting is separate from the mitigation planting.
Okay, so what we in effect have is roughly 1,200 new trees on site then, or close to it.
That's my understanding.
I'm working through the mitigation plans for the two different projects. One is the preliminary plat itself, and both in terms of its impacts along 49th Street, as well as the proposed elimination of wetlands B and C. And then I'm looking at the mitigation plan for the proposed pump station along the nearby street. And I'm just wanting to make sure that any mitigation is not being double counted. So the mitigation plan for the pump station notes that it will impact 5,000 square feet of buffer to wetland A, and in mitigation proposes 15,800 square feet of enhanced buffer elsewhere around wetland A. But then when I look at the mitigation plan for the other impacts, that same 15,800 feet shows up again on that plan. And I'm just wanting to make sure that it hasn't been used twice, that mitigation isn't being used both to claim mitigation for the pump station and then also mitigation for impacts to either 49th or eliminating wetlands B and C. What might your answer be to that?
If I may, I would love to defer that to the applicant's consultant, who I believe is within the Hatton Godat Pantier's office, Mr. Wambach.
We'll make a checklist of questions to come back to that you would recommend deferring to the applicant for response.
Okay.
And feel free whenever. My goal is simply to get the best answers, and if you feel that the some of the other experts can provide that, that's fine with me.
Thank you.
This is a very close next question to the last one, which is in the mitigation plan for the impacts to the primary site. There are a host of mitigations. There is expanded wetland, there is expanded buffer, there is restoration of wetland and restoration of buffer. But it's not clear to what extent those are proposed in mitigation of the utility impacts along 49th Street, as opposed to the elimination of, or proposed elimination of wetlands B and C. Do you have anything that differentiates the mitigation for the one as opposed to the other?
Yeah, I believe the mitigation for B and C is well defined, if I'm remembering correctly in the report, but I do think that the impacts to the wetland along 49th Ave is a little bit of a question mark, as we would like to reduce the amount of impacts as much as possible through the construction. And while we have a good idea of the right of way and where exactly the improvements might be along 49th Ave, we just want to make sure that it ties back in appropriately on the back of sidewalk, and that we can evaluate those impacts and mitigate for them appropriately during the actual review of the impacts. So I think that there is an amount in the report itself for the impacts along 49th Avenue, 49th Avenue. However, it is a variable right of way along that area, and there is some shifting that will need to be done to get the improvements in there.
Okay. And am I correct in understanding that proposed phase one would involve all wetland mitigation?
Yes, that is correct.
One of the public comments to the original notice came from a Franklin Polk dated November 1 of last year, in which he expressed or noted that all of divisions 2 and 3 and some portion of division 1 are proposed to be located in areas marked quote high groundwater hazard end of quote areas within the Thurston County mapping, and questioned and also noted that under Thurston County regulations this development would be prohibited. You had a lengthy response to Mr. Polk's many comments, but I didn't see a response to this question in your responses. Is it because you simply feel that the Thurston County ordinance does not apply, or was there some other reason that it was not responded to?
That is part of the reason. However, I thought in my response, I talked about the drainage all being managed on site and the need for separation to groundwater for the entire development being assessed as a part of the drainage report for the overall plat, and would need to be assessed with a full drainage report with the site development grading plans, along with further studies being completed before we would actually approve the work being done. So while we have a preliminary drainage report that has evidence in there that we are confident the project would be able to move forward, there's still further evidence that will be, or documentation that will be provided during the site development grading to show the work of that more fully.
I think the way I phrased that question wasn't as kind as it should have been. I didn't mean to suggest you hadn't responded. It just didn't seem to be as direct a response as I was looking for. So let me try that again. Do you feel that Mr. Polk's reference to the Thurston County ordinances has any application to this project?
No.
Okay. I'll confess to having to think long and hard about the exemption or the basis for eliminating the proposed or eliminating wetlands B and C based upon economic impacts. In more than, or in other jurisdictions, I have been reluctant to grant variances or special uses exemptions simply based upon economics of a project when there is established use, feasible use nonetheless. This is different. I recognize that. I recognize that there's a great many components to that issue in this case. And so it's not simply, well, I'd like to build a nicer house. That's not the sort of thing that's going on here, and therefore it's not why this is an issue. And I'm sorry for the length of this lead into the question, but I, in the past, have been nervous about approving variances based upon economic impacts as opposed to viability of development. And so I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind, or I would appreciate if you would elaborate upon the city's perspective, how it viewed it in this instance, how it has viewed similar issues in somewhat related instances, if you can just elaborate upon that issue.
Yes, absolutely. I cannot speak to other instances where small wetlands have been eliminated, as I haven't seen other instances within the city where something like that has been proposed. In this instance, we looked at the entirety of the development, the amount of infrastructure, and the potential public benefit to the surrounding area in getting the opportunity to get adjacent properties off of septic systems and the environmental benefits that that could have, to Black Lake and the surrounding area, along with the how in line with our sewer comprehensive plan it is, and the transportation plan, the improvements would be. So with all of those things considered, we did have to balance, the ordinance allowance for the removal of the small wetlands based on, meeting the criteria, and the amount of extension of utilities that any development would need to bring to this property to develop it. So there is a balancing act there, and because these infrastructure improvements are in line with those comprehensive plan elements, we ultimately decided that it was in line with the ordinance and met the ordinance criteria.
You spoke briefly about open spaces. Your staff report discusses them in significantly greater detail. But if you wouldn't mind just providing me with a bit of a larger explanation of both passive and active open spaces in this, how passive has been recognized, and again, what sort of public benefit the proposed open spaces would provide.
Absolutely. So let me pull up the map, as I think that will depict it well. So on the map, there is a proposed storm pond in this area that meets the requirements for being dry 6 months, at a minimum 6 months out of the year. And
I'm sorry, sorry to interrupt, but we'll refer to that as Track B for the record.
Great. Track B, and as one of the conditions, we have included a requirement to include a accessible path down to the bottom of the open space, along with a sign at the intersection of the sidewalk, so people will know that that is an available open space, large, grassy area for people to use, whether that is, for whatever recreation they would like to, to have. There's also a trail proposed around the storm pond, so that could be used year round as an amenity. And I believe I believe it does go through a portion of the enhanced wetland, buffer area, if I'm remembering correctly, over in this area. So I think there is an allowance within the ordinance for paths that go through, wetland buffers to, be permitted to count towards the open space amount, and can be provided as a passive open space. In addition, there is a park with open lawn and play area over here, which is Tract C, and that will provide additional amenity and open space area for the community. And then lastly, I think what I would like to just point out is the amount of sidewalk that's being provided throughout the subdivision per Tumwater Municipal Code, and the connection to the asphalt path on Black Lake Belmore Road that will connect the subdivision to the school and kind of create a good circular, walking path through this neighborhood and back out to other neighborhoods and amenities in the area.
would you agree with me that there's a bit of a tension between the goals of protecting Tract A, the large wetland, with the goal of using Tract B as open space and providing walking areas around it? Because Tract A is to be kept off limits, it's to be fenced, et cetera, to discourage any access into it. So since these two sit side by side, you're trying to marry two disparate purposes, protection of one, public use of the other. In this case, do you feel like that's being achieved?
Yes, and it's explicitly allowed within the ordinance, within the open space ordinance, that you can have, you know, walking paths through wetland buffers as an amenity, and that would meet a portion of the open space requirements.
Okay. Then while you have that map up, there are two areas where this connects to existing public rights of way along the 49th Street to the north and 58th Lane to the south. As we, if you could visually, I'm sorry, describe how, if you were driving by either one of those, how you, what you would see in the way of improvements along the frontage.
So along 49th Avenue, there will be, curb, gutter, street trees, planter strip, sidewalk along the portion that abuts this property. So that extends through this area on 49th Avenue and this small frontage area as well. And then additionally over on 58th Lane, which is currently a private street, will be converted to a public street and have the same sidewalk, curb, gutter, planter strip, street trees connecting out to Black Lake Belmore Road. And then along Black Lake Belmore Road to the south, there will be a 4-foot asphalt path leading down to the school.
The pump station is slightly distanced from the project. It sits closer to Black Lake Belmore Road or off of it. Does it require any additional frontage improvements?
I believe water is required to be extended to it, but I do not believe that there are additional frontage improvements on that parcel. No.
Oh, all right. There's been this rather extraordinary back and forth between the applicants, wetlands expert and ecology. I think 8 reports in all discussing the adequacy of the wetlands examination. And as you've noted, it's somewhat inconclusive in where it leads us. But yet your testimony was that notwithstanding some of that uncertainty, that city staff's position finds that the studies are adequate and the mitigation is sufficient. Is there anything you would like to add to that brief summary?
No, I think the staff report covers all of the items that city staff has to report on for the wetland reports, and I'm sure the applicant will want to address the conversation as well.
Okay. A bit similar, slightly different, is concern expressed by members of the public regarding protection of Oregon spotted frogs. But again, somewhat discussed in this colloquy between the applicant and ecology, but more between the applicant and certain neighborhood or environmental associations. As to that and concerns about its protection, does staff have any worry that proposed conditions are adequate to protect the Oregon spotted frog?
Yes, we do feel that the conditions are in place to protect the Oregon spotted frog and habitat or potential habitat.
I'm sorry, I am bouncing back to the ecology's positions. If I could maybe summarize hundreds of pages of materials, ecology seems to be, well, why don't we just do one more study in the early part of the growing season, and then we'll be satisfied that it's all okay. It's not the most outrageous suggestion in the world. How does city staff respond to that suggestion?
I think this is, it does not seem like the report was out of bounds with other reports that the city has reviewed and approved in the past from various different consultants. There were many forms of documentation for different times that studies and observations occurred on the property. I believe the additional data sheets were provided in additional reports. So, you know, I don't believe the city has a concern with the existing critical area report and the findings within it.
Oh, okay. Mr. I'm sorry, could I have you pull back up the site plan? Ms. Brooke, I'm curious as to why 58th Lane is not extended and stubbed out at the easterly boundary of the site instead of a cul-de-sac somewhere further west. Why not bring it to that boundary as part of the city's connectivity goals?
Yeah, so instead of extending what is already a partially existing cul-de-sac at the end of 58th Lane, partially a private road, there is this road that travels east-west that does have a stub out for connectivity to the adjacent parcel. And that is also in line with the transportation goals of having, you know, connectivity to adjacent parcels that, you know, may develop in the future. So if we look at a little bit more of a larger view of this area, if you don't mind me bringing on just a little bit of a map for a moment.
No, I think that would.
The cul-de-sac or partial cul-de-sac terminates here, and you know there's an existing home on this property right here. This is a railroad currently, and there are multiple parcels that have not been developed, kind of in a pie shape. They are at a minimum locked in. You know, there's not really much of a connection over to the east, other than at 54th Ave, Trosper, where there is a partial railroad crossing or crossing for cars over the railroad. So the idea, I think, when looking at the overall transportation network is that this road, you know, these roads right here would be the potential connection, I think this one more specifically, over to Trosper in the future. And then this one would be for internal connectivity, you know, through this parcel to the east and meet up with this road that would continue on to Trosper.
Okay, and I guess why I was curious is looking at that and looking to the southeast of the project site, the stub out slightly north leads to that property to the southeast not being connected to that road. And I just wondered if there was any thought about that.
Can you say that again? Sorry, I did not.
Too many directional references. So if you were to continue 58th Lane east, it would come to the southeast corner of the project site. And if it existed to that point, it could then also provide access to the property that is southeast of that point, whereas the current stub out only allows that connectivity to the property directly to the east. In other words, one less property that has access via 58. And I think you've answered the question, but if there's anything else you'd like to add to that about that decision.
Yes, I see what you're saying there. I don't think I have much to add other than in recent, or sorry, not in recent, but in past proposals to develop these lots, this has been a storm pond lot, and this has been the primary lot for subdividing the land. So I believe there is a slightly lower spot in this area that might not be as beneficial for connectivity, when compared to the remainder part of the property to the north. That isn't just, I think you're correct in saying that, maybe extending this over would have been a little bit better, but at the same time, I think staff was, finding the stub out to the north to be satisfactory for the connections that we were expecting.
Okay, now it makes a lot more sense. I appreciate that. There were a couple of public comments along the way expressing or asking the city to be certain to consider the cumulative impacts of this project and other proposed projects in the vicinity. Of course, the traffic impact analysis must do that and has done so. But from all other perspectives, Mr. Brookwood, do you feel like the staff has considered the impact of both this project and potential nearby projects with respect to stormwater, water and wastewater, and all other important utilities and other impacts?
Yes, I do believe this project has taken all of those items into consideration, addressing either the issues on the property themselves or extending utilities to the property to satisfy the requirements of the city of Tumwater.
Okay. I think finally that those are my questions of city staff. Would your testimony conclude this city's presentation then?
Yes.
Okay. We'll then turn to the applicant to allow it to present. Again, Ms. Burgess, do you want to be part of that? Do you want to be the traffic cop or simply turn the applicant loose? How would you like to proceed?
I am turning the applicant team loose to be all things presentation as well as traffic cop. If something occurs where I feel I need to participate, I will use my hand raise to try to get an appropriate attention, if that's okay with the examiner.
And then that's fine. And then the primary spokesperson would be Mr. Pantier?
That's correct. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Are there others collectively in that room who might be asked to testify?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
we have several. If you want to swear us all in at the same time, that's fine.
That's what I'm going to do. So, Mr. Pantier, tell me who I might hear from.
So you will hear from myself, and you will hear from Chris Carlson, Chloe McIntyre, and Curtis Wambach. And you may hear from the applicant, Rob Rice.
And I'm sorry, is it a Floyd or Lloyd McIntyre?
Chloe, and then I
Chloe.
forgot, we also have Aaron Van Aken, our transportation consultant, that isn't here in the conference room with us, but he is online.
Okay, since he's separate, I'll probably address Mr. Van Aken separately. So I'm sorry, Ms. McIntyre, I apologize. So as to the five of you in that room, do you collectively swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
So Mr. Pantier, the applicant's attorney, Ms. Burgess, has given you authority to speak on behalf of the applicant and to decide who among the team may give testimony. So with that in mind, I'll begin with you. What would you like to say?
Thank you, Mr. Examiner. Again, for the record, my name is Jeff Pantier. That's Pantier. I'm a professional land surveyor, and I'm responsible for the preliminary plat layout that's before us today. I think Alex has it as exhibit number 2. We had it up on the screen earlier.
Yes.
Exhibit 2. So thank you, Alex, for the precise and thorough presentation, not only in the staff report, but also your presentation tonight. Very thorough. And that's helpful. Before I get started, I just want to briefly talk about the presentation and the format we're going to follow here. So we've already introduced the applicant team. When I get started here, I'm going to provide a brief overall summary of the project. And when I get done with that, we'll get into some of the technical aspects of the project where we'll introduce or we'll allow the experts to discuss, at least in a summary level, their work in support of the project. That'll include some discussion on the sewer, which I'll present. We'll have Mr. Van Aken talk about a transportation study. We're going to have Chris Carlson speak to some of the regulatory considerations with a focus on the wetlands, since that's a lot of what we've been talking about lately. And then we'll have Curtis Wambach with EnviroVector provide a slideshow and presentation of his work related to the wetlands, mitigation, and all of that. Following his presentation, we'll turn it over to Chloe. Chloe McIntyre will talk about soils and groundwater and how that influenced our concepts for stormwater management. When we get done with that, I'll close that out, and Heather can jump in whenever. Thank you, Heather. I'll take the keys to the bus for a while, but anytime you want the keys, you can just take them away from me. So with that, I've made some notes about some of your questions, and we're going to address where there were holes. And so we'll talk about those perhaps when I get done with my comments, and the experts will speak to some of those items that weren't completely resolved through Alex's testimony. So Vista Views is at Black Lake is a proposed subdivision that we've been working on for about 3 years now. The planning process included several site-specific technical evaluations that culminated in a project that will achieve the applicant's objectives while also serving the public interest in providing needed housing supplies and infrastructure to support the southwest region of the city of Tumwater. Technical studies have included wetlands, wildlife, groundwater, soil and geotechnical, transportation, stormwater, sanitary sewer routing. I'll talk more about that in a minute, and potable water distribution. Process included some rather unique situations. So in order to carry this project out, there was an inordinate number of off-site easements and right-of-ways that were required to be acquired by the applicant in order to carry out the comprehensive sewer plan that is part of this project. As Alex mentioned, the planned project will include 184 single-family lots on the 54-acre site. And I'll just note that these 184 lots have been carefully planned to provide some diversity in the housing types that will be built on this site. So there's some different lot sizes presented on the preliminary plat, but I guess more importantly, there are front loaded lots and rear loaded lots. So there's alley loads and front loads, and that's intentional to provide a much better streetscape than what you might have in a conventional subdivision that is just all front loads with a more or less a sea of garage doors as you drive down the street. So this has been carefully planned. Rob Rice has developed many of these types of communities, not only in the city of Tumwater, but around the region. And so he has a lot of experience developing these diverse housing communities. You inquired about tracks B and C. I didn't hear Alex state that the total area of those two tracks that'll be used for passive and active recreation total over 4.5 acres. And so there's other open spaces that are being provided in addition to that, including the critical area tract A, but the areas that are being set aside just for the passive and active recreation, the specific passive and active recreation elements is over 4.5 acres. Each of the lots will be served by City of Tumwater sanitary sewer with a connection to the existing system located approximately 1 mile north of this site in the Mottman Industrial Park. We'll discuss that a little bit more here in a minute. Water will be extended from the existing systems located in 49th Avenue Southwest and Black Lake Belmore Southwest, and the completed system will provide for multiple system loops and connections, thus providing redundancy and fire flow for the completed project. Each lot will be accessed by public streets and alleys constructed to City of Tumwater standards. The streets are designed with a focus on interconnectivity with careful consideration of the existing topography. With the current design, the subdivision is considered a walkable community. And I'll just add and emphasize, although I think it was pretty well covered by Alex, your questions about how the phasing was aligned. I just want to emphasize that as part of phase one, the north-south through road, which will run from 49th Avenue Southwest on the north down to 58th Avenue on the south, that will all be constructed as part of the first phase. So sewer, water, street improvements, all of that interconnectivity from 49th Avenue to Black Lake Belmore Road will all occur on the very first phase. Sidewalks will be provided along each side of the public streets throughout the subdivision, thus providing safe walking routes to the nearby Black Lake Elementary School and bus waiting areas. The safe walk route to Black Lake Elementary School includes construction of a pathway from the southwest corner of the site. Maybe we could pull the plat map up. South along the east side of Black Lake Belmore Road southwest to the existing pathway located opposite the school. So there's the cursor, the southwest corner of the property. So if you go south off the page, this project will construct a pathway, an asphalt pathway south from the southwest corner down to the crossing. There's a Black Lake Elementary School lies south and west of this site. And the pathway, the construction of that pathway will connect that system so that the children that are residing in this neighborhood will have a safe walk route to get to the south, to get to the Black Lake Elementary School. Stormwater will be managed with water quality treatment and infiltration systems located in the northwesterly portion of the site. The systems will be designed in accordance with the City of Tumwater Drainage Manual. Chloe McIntyre is going to provide more detail on the stormwater design. As I mentioned, the sanitary sewer construction on this project is significant. There's probably not another parcel of land out in this region that could shoulder the cost and all the acquisition of easements and so forth that was required. There's probably not another property out in this region that could do it. I mean, it takes a project of this scale and magnitude to be able to take that on. There's 3/4 of a mile of gravity sewer extension located in 49th Avenue and Black Lake Belmore Road Southwest. Plus a force main that extends, like I said, a mile north to Mottman Industrial Park. There's a new sanitary sewer pump station that will serve this region and specifically the east and northeast sides of Black Lake. the 1 mile, that 1 mile of sanitary sewer force main be located in Black Lake Belmore Road, and then it'll catch the SAP Road and connect up, as I mentioned, to Montman Industrial Park. Mr. Rice has acquired several easements to carry this plan out. The total cost of the sewer improvements alone are in excess of $4 million. So as I mentioned, not that cost is a huge consideration here, but the public benefit that comes with this project, in that it serves a larger region along the Black Lake area. It's part of the city's comprehensive plan. This project will carry part of that plan out. With that, I'm going to, if you don't have any questions on that part of it, I'm going to turn this over to Aaron Van Aken, and he's going to speak to the transportation. Do you have any questions of anything that I presented so far?
Not so far. When we come back to some of the stormwater and wetlands issues, yeah, I'll have a few questions, but not yet. Thank you. So let's turn to Mr. Van Aken. And so, Mr. Van Aken, let's have you sworn. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't ask you if you did.
I do.
I'm too focused on my notes. I apologize. Okay, having gotten that out of the way, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Aaron Van Aken. That is VAN space AKEN. And I am a principal engineer at Heath and Associates. I'm also a licensed civil engineer specializing in traffic engineering and have over 10 years of experience. And I was the author of the most recent edition of, which was dated November 2024, of the Vista Views Black Lake Traffic Impact Analysis. So a traffic impact analysis evaluates the anticipated traffic generated by the project and its impact on the surrounding network. At the time that we did the report, it was proposed as 186 single-family dwelling units. However, the proposal is currently for 184. As mentioned, it's located on roughly 54 acres, and the site will have access to 49th Avenue Southwest via a new public road that would extend south and connect to 58th Lane Southwest. So while we started the traffic study, the first thing we have to do is scope out the requirements. And we were required to coordinate with the City of Tumwater, the City of Olympia, Thurston County, and Washington State Department of Transportation. All three provide, or all agencies, with the exception of City Olympia, provided requirements and comments, and that resulted in the evaluation of 10 nearby intersections. These 10 intersections are depicted in Figure 3 of the traffic impact analysis, and it was determined that the existing level of service, which is how you measure the transportation roadways, the level of service standard by all agencies is LOSD or better, and all intersections currently meet that. So the 186 single-family dwelling units, again, at the time of the report, that was the proposal, was estimated to bring in 1,786 daily trips and 178 PM peak hour trips. We evaluated a 7-year horizon of 2031, assuming full build-out and occupancy of the development, along with several other in-process developments and general background growth in the city. All study intersections maintained level of service C or better conditions, with the exception of Black Lake Boulevard Southwest and Black Lake Belmore Road Southwest. This intersection was projected to operate with LOS F or failing conditions, both with and without this project. Therefore, mitigation measures were recommended to offset the project's impacts. These mitigation measures included the construction of a separate northbound left and right turn lane. It's currently a single lane, so this would allow added capacity with different left and right turn lanes. In addition, there would also be the construction of a westbound acceleration lane on Black Lake Boulevard, and this would allow a 2-staged entry onto the roadway. So these combined improvements were projected to reduce the level of service from F to C and therefore bring the intersection within acceptable standards. Another mitigation that was previously discussed was the increased pedestrian connectivity via the offsite around a 280-foot walking path along the east side of Black Lake Boulevard or Black Lake Belmore Road. This would provide a continuous walking route to the local elementary school. The last mitigation was payment of traffic impact fees. Those are traffic impact fees and SEPA mitigation fees that would amount to roughly $850,000. And this would provide funding for future projects that are listed on the city's 6-year transportation improvement plan. The TIA was reviewed by all 3 agencies and went through a few updates based on their comments and was ultimately approved by all agencies. And it was determined that the proposed mitigation would offset the project's impacts. So that concludes my summary of the traffic study. I can also address, there was a couple comments submitted. I don't know if you would like me to address those now or if you had any questions on.
Well, maybe it's a combination of those. So let me begin, and then if there's others that you want to also respond to, I'll let you do in a minute. But before that, let's go back to where the meeting started tonight, which was the proposed elimination of the conditioning requiring a left turn lane into the development from 49th Street. The basis from the information I received from the city was that your TIA had concluded that it was unnecessary, but yet there it was in the conditions, and it hadn't been questioned until tonight. So while it wasn't in your recommended conditions, it had been there all along. Why the last minute suggestion that it be eliminated?
I can't speak to the timing of why or how that became a request this late in the game or this late in the process.
Okay, and that was probably an unfair question to you. You're not a decision maker. You're an expert providing analysis. So I'll put that one back in the pocket, and I'll ask that of maybe city staff. But from your perspective, as simply needed or not needed, your analysis concludes that the left turn lane was not needed at 49th. What might you want to add to that analysis, if anything?
Yeah, well, the left turn needs were based on the Washout Design Manual for left turn guidelines for storage at 2-lane controlled facilities. And based on their criteria, since the city doesn't have their own standards, most jurisdictions default to WashDOT Design Manual. And it's a function of advancing, opposing, and left turning vehicles and speed limits. And you either fall below or above the warrant threshold criteria. And in this instance, we were below and with quite a bit of buffer below. And so it was our recommendation that it was not necessary at the intersection.
And that's consistent with your 2031 analysis or forecast for the area?
Correct. And those are on pages 128 and 129 of the traffic impact analysis that show those graphs.
Okay. And then, as you noted, that there have been several public comments expressing concerns about traffic impacts. And maybe you saw particular ones that were worthy of response, but one of the ones I noticed was I don't believe that 58th will be the lesser used exit point to this development. I think it'll be the more used rather than 49th. You look at the layout, people going, if I'm going north, I have to go a long way past wetlands before I even get to 49th, or I can go out 58th and get to Black Lake Belmore quickly. I don't think it's a 2/3, 1/3 split of traffic out exiting this project. How might you respond to that belief?
Yeah, so the distribution is just looking at the numbers, is roughly balanced, and that's based on modeling that was provided by the Thurston Regional Planning Council. And they are the ones that come up with the distribution. And so based on that, it's roughly a 50-50 split use of those two access points.
Okay, I think I mean, your actual numbers favor 49th more than that. I could turn to the TIA and confirm that, but you may have those at your disposal. What are you showing as the two numbers for exit?
Trying to do some quick math here. So about 55% of the traffic was assigned on the 49th Street access.
Okay. All right. And while you utilize the methodology or information from the council, from your own expertise, is there anything about the nature of this project, its dynamics, its geography, the points of where people might want to go, anything about that leads you to doubt that division of traffic?
No, we reviewed it, and it's ultimately based on the origin and destination and where you reside in the plat, and generally with the outline distributions, it seems appropriate as an estimation.
Okay. All right. And so are there other comments by the public relating to traffic or your analysis that you would like to respond to?
The comments that I saw that were submitted were one by Mr. Rick Guthrie, Exhibit 11D. There were concerns about safety at two intersections, intersection 4 and 6. They were not listed out, but intersection 4 is 49th Avenue Southwest and Black Lake Belmore Road. And intersection 6, and these numbers they correspond to the intersection listing in our traffic study. Intersection 6 is 54th Avenue and Trosper Road. So these intersections we examined through a capacity evaluation and a review of the 5-year collision history. The intersection 4 had 3 incidents in the past 5 years, and intersection 6 had 1. There was nothing in the incident history that revealed any types of patterns or anything that warranted further investigation. And both intersections were determined to have adequate capacity for additional traffic loads. So there was nothing that prompted further investigation into those intersections. The next comment was from Becky Riley, Exhibit 11E. There were concerns about the methodology or the data that were collected in the traffic study as it relates to COVID impacts. We collected traffic counts in April of 2024. And by this time, all agencies are accepting new count data as we are far enough removed from COVID to have that influence. And Ms. Riley also had the safe walking routes concern, and we would respond to that with the construction of the 280-foot offsite walking path that would provide the continuous walking route. And that concludes the comments that I reviewed.
Okay, and that didn't add any questions that I would have. So thank you, Mr. Aiken. So Mr. Pantier, we'll turn back to you. Who would you like to present next?
Before I turn this over to Chris Carlson, I have a couple of things. I wonder if we could just confirm that all of the supplemental submittals regarding the wetlands and responses to neighbor comments, that they actually were assigned exhibit numbers. I just want to confirm we got in the staff report up to 31 exhibits. I'd like to know, maybe we can have Alex at some point respond to that, so we have a catalog of the total number of exhibits. We just want to make sure the record has all that.
And we would have gotten to that at one point or another, but that now is a good time as any to clean up our exhibit list. So Mr. So Alex, where do you show us with exhibits currently?
Yes, thank you. So looking at the staff report and the updated items, I still have 31 exhibits. However, there have been some additions to Exhibit 11. Exhibit 11 is numbered and has letters to identify the numerous different exhibits that were received at different public comment stages. I did not feel that it would be a good use of paper to list every single exhibit and public comment out. However, they are individualized within the exhibits 9, 10, and 11. I believe the most up-to-date, just checking my folder really quickly. So 11E, as in elephant, is the last exhibit that I have for Exhibit 11.
And would that include the email you received this afternoon?
That does not. So that would be F when I submit that to everybody.
Okay.
So,
Let me understand this. Let me ask this in a slightly different way. Except for the email you received, the public comment you received earlier today, would exhibit 11A through E comprise all public comment received up until this afternoon?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then are there any other exhibits having letters added to them that have additional exhibits?
No, all of those are listed within the staff report.
Okay, so example, exhibit 9, which also contains alphabetized add-ons, it's not been added to, nor have any other of the exhibits had additions to them, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then exhibit 31, just to be safe, is what?
The map from the general sewer plan.
we know where all of Curtis's and your stuff is in here?
Mr. Pantier, what's your question?
Well, we submitted a series of responses to comments. Specifically, they were related to Department of Ecology's comments, and I just don't see them on the list. And so I'm trying to understand which exhibit numbers city staff has assigned for those.
Yes, those are within the public comment section, since they were responses to public comments. So I believe they would be within 10, exhibit 10, and they are individualized within exhibit 10. So for example, Ecology's comments was 10K, and then the applicant responses to the Department of Ecology comments related to the stormwater facilities is 10L. The consultant responses to Department of Ecology comments would be 10M, as in Mary, etc.
That's good. That's all I needed. Thank you, Alex.
Yep.
So that I understand, Mr. Burke, exhibit 9 was the compilation of all public comment received prior to the SEPA MDNS notice, correct?
Yes, after the notice of application, before the MDNS was issued.
And then exhibit 10 was largely in response to the SEPA MDNS, including all of the colloquy related to wetlands and mitigation.
Yes, that is correct.
And then exhibit 11 was the post SEPA additional public comment.
Correct.
Which would continue to today, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Examiner, before Mr. Pantier dives back in, I know we haven't received it yet, but would Mr. Burke just be able to tell us or tell the applicant who the name of the additional commenter for 11F as in Foxtrot?
Yes, it's Bonnie Blessing.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So a couple more things. Thank you, Heather. I just want to, first of all, I wonder if Alex, while we're carrying on with testimony here tonight, is it possible for you to email like me, maybe Heather and I, that new comment under item F, just so we have it, and then we could take a look at it while we continue on?
Oh, sure. I can email that out. That's fine.
And then I just want to make a point of clarification. So it seems like the alphabetized attachments or exhibits that are embedded in Exhibit 9, and Exhibit 10, and then 11. I get the format there. The exhibits that go with 9 were generated prior to the SEPA being issued, so they were basically in response to the notice of application. And then the exhibits that are embedded into Exhibit 10, I think I heard you say that they were in response to the SEPA issuance, the MDNS. But I just want to point out that some of those, I think, were comments that came in and applicant responses there too, that were after the close of SEPA, once SEPA was actually closed and finalized. Okay, and so they weren't really, I wouldn't necessarily, I just want to make the point that some of those are not really before SEPA was closed. There were some before, and then there's going to be some that were after the SEPA appeal period closed.
Yeah, that's for my purpose. And so noted, Mr. Pantier, it doesn't matter to me. I'm just trying to establish an exhibit list. The reason why they're issued, the timing of their issue isn't terribly important. And while there might have been a better hook to hang some of those on, it's not consequential. So again, duly noted, but beyond that, it's not important.
Appreciate that. I wonder if you could pull the plat map up there, Alex. I want to speak to 2 items related to a couple of the items related to traffic and street connectivity.
Would you like me to pull that up, or would you like Chloe to pull that up? I don't want to control
okay.
If you want to control it for your items, that's perfectly fine.
I'll get it.
So I think we probably covered this, but I just want to be absolutely clear. So regarding the extension of 58th Avenue or 58th Lane to the east, the property that lies immediately east of the subject property and the property that lies immediately southeast of the subject property, those are owned by the same group. So that's not 2 separate parcels of land, but that's one parcel of land. It's the pie-shaped or triangular shaped parcel. And so the stub road that's provided on the south side of lot 122 provides access to that ownership.
Okay, thank you.
So if we could pull the screen down so we can see 49th, there was some discussion about the left turn lane. So when Mr. Van Aken completed the traffic study, as he mentioned, he also studied left turn warrants along 49th into the project site. And as he stated, based on the WSDOT criteria, it didn't meet the warrants for a left turn pocket. The default for the city is when you have frontage along an existing street that you build the city standards to the city standard. Well, the city ultimate standard there would call for a 3-lane section, but as you can see, the subject property in that location is only 100 feet wide. It's basically wide enough to build the access, but there wouldn't be any point in requiring a turn lane because we wouldn't be able to build it. The property that would be required to actually complete that lies east of the subject property. So it's kind of a moot point in that we couldn't perform that work anyway, and it's not warranted.
And the city agreed with that analysis in discussing it earlier today and realized the error in the condition and agrees with removing that sentence from the condition.
Okay, thanks.
If we could, do we have the ability to pull up the Thurston Jew data map, Chloe? So if you could zoom out, there was some, and then scroll so we can see more to the east. A little bit more. Okay, well, so there was some conversation or discussion about the distribution of the traffic versus 49th and 58th. And as Mr. Van Aken testified, we get the distribution, or he gets the distribution from Thurston Regional Planning Council. And the Thurston Regional looked at this a couple of different times, and it's noteworthy that in the end, when Thurston Regional provided that distribution, they had to consider the significant City of Tumwater capital improvement project that was made at the interchange at Trosper Road and Interstate 5. That project is significant in that there was roundabouts constructed. It makes for a much more free flowing of traffic. So, you know, so that distribution that was provided by Thurston Regional Planning, it considered that improvement. And I think that was just completed in the last probably 12 months. Okay, so if there's no questions for me on any of that stuff, I'm gonna turn the keys to the bus over to Chris Carlson.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening, Examiner Scheibmeier. For the record, my name is Chris Carlson. I'm the planning manager for Hatton Godat Pantier, and I'd like to first of all echo Jeff's comments previously about the thoroughness of the staff report and Mr. Baruch's presentation this evening. So by way of background, I've been a professional planner for 34 years. Notably, I've worked for the City of Tumwater in various capacities in the planning department, including assistant planner, associate planner, senior planner, planning manager, and finally, I left employment about 4 years ago as the city's permit manager. So I have a lot of knowledge of their process and code. I want to touch a little bit on the site characteristics, and I think Alex did a really nice job of talking about the use of the property in terms of grazing cattle on the 53 acres. There had been up to 30 heads of cattle roaming the site in any given year for many, many years on this particular site. They had unfettered access to wetland A, which is up in the northwest portion of the property. It's considered a Category 2 wetland, as identified in Mr. Wambach, Envirovector's critical areas report. And so that particular activity, you know, wallowing and grazing in the buffer of that wetland has degraded it severely over the years. The consulting biologist, as you pointed out, I know you had talked about concerns, a lot of talk about wetlands B and C, the small wetlands in the southern portion of the property. He also identified those as wetlands, and Curtis, when he gets to his testimony, is going to get into more of the weeds of that. But there was a year-long study, advanced study report. It's an exhibit in the staff report that Mr. Wambach put together to make that determination, because according to you know, what the ecology's rating system basically does a rapid assessment form, a routine rapid assessment form, goes out and takes a look at the site, and they look for plants and hydrology and soils. Well, there were some suspect areas, and C and B and C were two of these suspect areas that we felt needed further look at, because it just wasn't totally clear. And again, Curtis is going to explain that as part of his presentation. So my point is on that is that we went the extra mile and went above the routine methodology in the wetland guidance and did that year-long study and did determine those to be wetlands. And I believe the indicator was hydrology that Mr. Wambach studied for over a year out there with data measuring devices. So those particular wetlands, and it's noted in the report and on the preliminary plat map, are small. One of them's a little over 2,100 square feet, and the other one's a little over 1,600 feet in square feet in area. So they're very small wetlands. And I want to turn to the City of Tumwater's wetland code now. The three specific sections in the code, and again, I think Alex did a good job of detailing this in his staff report, are 1628.095. The City of Tumwater has small wetland standards that allow for the elimination of wetlands that are less than 4,000 square feet if specific criteria that's outlined in that section of the code can be met. So first of all, the wetlands B and C are both under 4,000 square feet, and so they can be considered for elimination. You had mentioned in some of your remarks or questions to Alex about your concern about granting variances, or you might have referred to it as a special use permit or something like that. Their code isn't, it is not considered a variance or a special use in their code. It's allowed outright if you meet specific criteria. So I just wanted to clear that piece up. So it's not a variance or a special use.
The reference wasn't to special use, it was to reasonable use. But go ahead.
I'm sorry, I apologize. So anyway, so we meet the criteria for the small wetland standards as long as we mitigate. We have to go to the next section of the code, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, which is Tumwater Municipal Code section 1628.220. And that's the wetland compensation section of the code. Basically, so 1628.090 says that you can eliminate these wetlands that are under 4,000 square feet if they meet the criteria, and then you compensate in accordance with 1628.220. Both of these particular wetlands are classified, the B and C that we're talking about, are classified as category 4, which is the lowest rating wetland. They had a very low habitat score, so they're not creating, or they don't create any substantial habitat. And so once you mitigate, and I will mention, and I know Curtis is going to get into this a little bit too, in terms of the mitigation plan, you have to mitigate at specific ratios as outlined in 1628.220 of the code. Well, we're mitigating the impacts of our wetlands impacts, and this would include both wetlands B and C, the frontage on 49th Avenue that's adjacent to the wetland that we have to construct per city standards, and the pump station. We're mitigating those impacts at a 30-to-1 ratio, which is well above what the city's code requires. So then you have to turn to avoiding wetlands impacts. And city code is a little bit different than some others that you might be familiar with. I know you do a lot of hearing examiner work throughout Western Washington, but the City of Tumwater's code doesn't have a separate mitigation sequencing section that a lot of hearing examiners may be familiar with. It has a section called avoiding wetland impacts, and that's in 1628.180, and particularly subsection D of 1628.180 has specific criteria for these particular wetlands in terms of them being allowed to be eliminated. And the operative words in there, and I'll just read them to you. Under 1628.180D, the applicant needs to demonstrate impacts are necessary and unavoidable based on a reasonable alternative, which will accomplish the applicant's objective. And I emphasis added on the applicant's objective there. And Jeff talked about that a little bit in his particular presentation. So, I mean, here we have an applicant has the objective to develop residential subdivisions that consistent with city codes, plans, standards. And, he's also got an expectation as a developer to, make the project pencil. So nonetheless, we addressed the avoidance piece by providing, and it's an exhibit in the staff report. I think we called it Exhibit A. It's essentially another concept alternate layout. And that particular layout with the 50-foot buffers on wetlands B and C eliminated 17 lots. And elimination of 17 lots, and I'll just say it again, doesn't meet with the applicant's objective. So one of the things that's not mentioned in 16D, but I think it's important to point out, is that the city also has objectives. So that particular scope code section talks about 1628-180 talks about the applicant's objectives, but the city also has objectives, and I'll rattle off a few of them for you here. First of all, increasing housing stock, as you know, and everybody in the audience knows, we're talking about a housing crisis. We need more housing, more affordable housing. This is a beautiful place to live, and we have a lot of people moving here. So it would eliminate 17 lots within the subdivision, which is contrary to the city's stated policy of increasing housing stock within the city. I know you've had a chance to look at that alternative layout too, but one of the other objectives that the city has is complete streets and connectivity. And the alternate layout would require us to provide a couple of dead-end cul-de-sacs, which do two things. One is you don't get connectivity through the neighborhood for both vehicles and bicycle and pedestrians getting down to the school and out to 58th Avenue and vice versa up to the north. The other piece with creating dead-end cul-de-sacs is that they're not good for emergency services response. They're only one way in and out of a place is not good for both police and fire response. The other issue is that the creation of the cul-de-sacs and all that on that alternate layout that we provided would result in the dead ending of the city's water mains in that portion of the subdivision, which they like to loop their systems for various reasons, including not having stagnant water at the end of dead end runs. Jeff touched on it very well. This particular project is the only one here that can actually bear the burden of this pump station that's consistent, sanitary sewer pump station, which is in a place that's actually consistent with the Tumwater Comprehensive Plan. I think we totally nailed it. We work with city staff, and it's right on the spot in terms of where it needs to be out in this particular area, which has a significant environmental benefit in terms of making sanitary sewer available here to help with both groundwater and surface water quality. Black Lake, which is just several hundred feet to the west of this particular site, is on the Federal Clean Water Act 303D list for phosphorus. Septic systems are a main source of phosphorus that pollutes those surface water bodies. And so it'd give the opportunity for septic to sewer conversion to ameliorate that water quality concern for Black Lake. And then wetland mitigation, finally wetland mitigation. The wetland mitigation that we're proposing is triple, and Curtis can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's triple what's required by the code. And so, in conclusion on that piece, we believe the project design on the wetland piece, eliminating the wetland, we believe that the project design as proposed by the applicant is a reasonable alternative that accomplishes the applicant's objective. And as a bonus, it also accomplishes many of the city objectives. So the other piece is the infrastructure exception, and I'll just be real brief on this. We are requesting an infrastructure exception due to the location of the wetland adjacent to the north boundary of the property along North 49th Avenue as part of the city's development standards development guide. We are required to build urban type street improvements, curb gutter sidewalk, landscape strip, separated sidewalk, and street lights. And so we're going to be encroaching farther into what little buffer there is up there on 49th Avenue. And so, and I know you read it, but Curtis and I collaborated and we included a section in the critical areas report that goes over the criteria for infrastructure exception point by point. And we believe that we meet the requirements for the examiner to consider granting us that infrastructure exception. With that, I have a couple other things. I'm kind of done with that piece, but I have a couple other things on some of your other questions. I know you had, and I don't know if that's a good time. That's a good time where you have questions on the wetland and infrastructure exception piece?
Those will be addressed, Mr. Wambach.
Okay. So a couple of things, questions, kind of close the loop on some of the questions that you asked, Alex. You asked about tree count. And so the mitigation that we're proposing for the wetland mitigation, for the enhancement of the wetland and wetland buffer, those trees are separate from the 378 trees that are required by 1608 of the municipal code tree protection and replacement ordinance. So the trees that are required by the 1608, the tree protection and replacement ordinance, have a different size standard. And so we're meeting those requirements with the installation of trees in the open space areas along the boundaries of the track, particularly along the southeast boundary of the track. There's a homeowner association track where we're providing a tree buffer. And then the street trees also count as the replacement. So there's a lot of road in here and 30 feet on center. And so those add up real quick. So hopefully that answers your question. The next thing I don't think we totally closed the loop on is you had a concern about the double counting of the wetland mitigation. We got the pump station, we got 49th Avenue, and then we've got the elimination of wetland B and C. Those aren't being double counted. All that mitigation is being done around wetland A, but it's not being double counted. Like I mentioned, we're at 30-to-1 replacement ratio, and that's part of the reason we are at the 30-to-1 replacement ratio. High groundwater hazard, Alex was spot on there. Well, I know, I don't know if you're familiar with Thurston County's critical areas ordinance, but Thurston County regulates high groundwater hazards areas through their critical areas ordinance. And so there are certain restrictions and setbacks and that sort of thing under Thurston County Code, which doesn't apply here. Tumwater regulates high groundwater hazard area through implementation of their stormwater drainage manual. So Alex is exactly correct. The high groundwater hazard areas ordinance under Thurston County Code do not apply. You had a question, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it had to do with the Department of Ecology. And I guess what I'd like to say is that the Department of Ecology obviously had the opportunity to appeal the city's SEPA determination, and they also had an opportunity to appear at the hearing this evening. As far as I know, they're not at the hearing this evening, and they obviously didn't appeal the SEPA determination. Just for clarification too, and I know it doesn't matter because we're going to get the kids that are going to walk down to Black Lake Elementary there. But Aaron, this is only a 280-foot extension of this asphalt path, 4-foot asphalt path. It basically starts at the southeast intersection of 58th Lane, and then we'll be extending 280 feet down to the south where there's an existing concrete sidewalk in front of the Black Lake Park subdivision project right across from Black Lake Elementary School. And again, there's an existing marked crosswalk down there. I think that's it. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Do not. Thank you, Mr. Carlson.
Thank you.
Given that, I think we'd like to turn this over to Curtis Wambach with EnviroVector. He's got a little slide presentation that we'll walk through. And Curtis will try to, well, it'll be what it is. It's a summary of a lot of the information you've already read. We understand that. But for you and the public's benefit, we think this will be beneficial for everybody. So Curtis, take it away.
Before you do so, Mr. Wambach, make certain that I receive a copy of that immediately following tonight's hearing, and we'll identify that as Exhibit 32.
All right, sounds good.
Might point out that if all these are in the report already,
Okay,
right, you know, you might let them know.
yeah, so in this summary, I will just add that almost everything in this summary is already in the reports. I just pulled pieces out of the reports just to summarize our work that we've done on the site. So I'll get started. So I want to introduce myself and a little bit about myself, my credentials. My name is Curtis Wambach. I'm the principal and senior biologist at EnviroVector Environmental Consulting. After my master's degree in 1997, I worked at a nonprofit organization restoring streams and wetlands for a couple of years, and then I joined Telesia Consultants. Telesia Consultants is an environmental consulting company in Woodinville, Washington. Then I worked for the Department of Fish and Wildlife in 2003. And for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, I was basically their consultant in the engineering division, worked throughout the state of Washington, prepared mitigation projects throughout the state of Washington. And then in 2006, I went out on a business venture and started my own consulting firm, PE Consultants. 2010 to 2011, I worked at Southern California Edison as lead scientist on a $350 million transmission line project. And once that was completed, I came back to Washington and started EnviroVector Environmental Consultants, where I'm at right now. All right, so I'll move on. So I actually prepared 11 reports for this project, 11 reports and documents. And that includes Mazama Pocket Gopher reports, 3 of those, sewer line critical areas report, critical areas report, a mitigation plan for the property, and the advanced study report, and critical areas report and mitigation plan for the infrastructure in 49th Street, and so critical areas report for the pump station. 3 responses to the Department of Ecology. Altogether, it's 11 documents. So I'm going to try to go through this as expediently as possible. There's a lot to cover, and I think it's important to cover these things because there has been some question on methodology and mitigation, and I think I can answer all those questions through this presentation. All All right, so first of all, there's actually been 17 site visits I performed over 2 years on the site, and I think that's important to mention. It's a long-term study that we performed all the way from gophers to wetlands, quite a bit. And we've been on the site since 25th of July 2022 to 29th of July 2024, 2 years. And the critical areas evaluation, we started in the 26th of July 2022, and that went all the way to the 19th of June 2023. So quite a few site visits, a lot of work on the site. And I want to mention that the first step to any wetland determination is to look at aerial photographs and agency databases. That's the most important thing. And historical aerial photographs and agency databases support the EnviroVector evaluation and delineation as analyzed and described in both of our reports, the advanced study report and the critical areas report and mitigation plan. And I want to mention something about, we're using the regional supplement. So there was some talk about a 1987 manual, and there is a 1987 manual, but the 2010 regional supplement largely replaces most sections in the 1987 manual, and the regional supplement is very specific to our region, a region that has wet seasons and dry seasons. So it's the best available science, and we're using this manual. It's actually the manual for our region, and that's what we're using in the study. So it's important to say that there's been some questions on some aerial photographs. So I want to go over aerial photography real quick, as that's the first step that we do in any study. So, the regional supplement clearly states that transitory flooding following heavy storm events and flooding during years of abnormally high precipitation can frequently occur in non-wetlands. And low resolution aerial photographs should be reviewed, but are not reliable if they're the solitary indicator of wetland hydrology. Now, page 65 of the regional supplement states that hydrology indicators are often the most transitory of wetland indicators. And page 71 of the regional supplement states that care must be used in applying this indicator, referring to flooding and aerial photographs, because surface water may be present in non-wetland areas immediately after a rainfall event or during periods of unusually high precipitation, runoff, tides, or river stages. Therefore, some non-wetlands flood frequently for brief periods. And that's a quote. That's all a quote from the regional supplement. So that should be taken into account. You cannot look at aerial photographs and make a wetland determination based upon aerial photographs. You have to get on the ground and do the study. So the first thing we apply on the ground is the routine on-site determination method. It's a rapid assessment method. And we delineated wetland A, which is a typical wetland, using the routine on-site determination method. And there's wetland A, and you can see this is our flags that we placed around wetland A. Wetland A has a very well-defined boundary on wetland A. So in wetland A is a category 2 wetland, but it's very well-defined boundary. So I want to talk about our field methodology a little bit. So we applied the routine on-site determination method. That's just the basic rapid assessment on the southern portion of the subject property. But no, there was no wetland indicators that were identified in the areas mapped. There was areas mapped as hydric soils in the southern portion of the subject property, but there was no wetland indicators in that area. So thereby no wetlands would occur on the southern portion of the subject property using the routine on-site determination method. So, however, there was disturbances that were associated with long-term agricultural practices that occur in the southern portion of the subject property that could have masked or altered wetland indicators. So we went to procedures that were applied in chapters 2 to 4. Now, chapters 2 to 4 in the regional supplement are basically the routine on-site determination method. That's just the basic rapid assessment method. But in our section 1.5 of our advanced study report, we go through procedural steps. These procedural steps, they will tell us what methods are the best methods to use in our study. So chapters 2 and 4 provide the most current, best available science to apply wetland indicators in our region under the routine on-site determination method. So we also followed the procedural steps to determine the appropriate method and provide step-by-step procedural process in section 1.5 of our advanced study report. And all of these procedural steps in chapters 2 to 4 led us to chapter 5. And chapter 5 is for difficult situations. So in the southern portion of the subject property, the most appropriate chapter in the regional supplement is chapter 5. And following the procedural steps in chapter 5, 3 appropriate methods were determined practical to perform on subject property. And these methods include shallow groundwater monitoring wells, chemically testing soils using alpha-alpha dipyridol, and redox tests using oxidation reduction potential. So we had to go through a number of different steps to get to those methods, and those methods are practical for performing on the subject property. So we installed 17 groundwater monitoring wells in the area mapped as hydric soils. And you can see this shows also the wetlands that we delineated as well, wetlands C and B. But the red dots, those are all the monitoring wells that we installed in that area. That's quite a bit of monitoring wells. And we also installed 3 piezometers. Those are deeper wells, and that's to determine whether there's hydrostatic pressure that's pushing water up from below or there's a perched water table. So pairing those 2 together, and I'll get into that maybe just in a little bit of detail, but I'm trying to go as fast as we can because if you have any questions, you could stop me at any point, but I'm going to try to go as fast as I can through this. So table 7 in our advanced studies report talks about specification of the monitoring wells. I didn't include that here, but I just want to point that out. So if you need to see what the monitoring wells, the specific specifications of the monitoring wells, that's where you can find it. And insert 1 shows the illustration of the shallow wells and piezometers, and insert 2 shows data loggers that were used, and I include that information right here. And all these specifications, they come out of the manuals on how to perform these procedures. So we're following these procedures precisely on how to install these wells. And up to the left here on the top, that's the shallow monitoring well that we installed. We installed 17 of these. And this is the piezometer that we installed. And we installed it to these specifications. Other than this illustration up here is not quite to scale because the shallow monitoring wells that go 24 inches below the surface and the piezometers go to 48 inches below the surface. And then I think this is important to mention is that we use water level data loggers. And we record with these data loggers, record water levels every hour. So every hour we get a water level reading. And I think that's very important to mention in this whole process. So questions, just gonna move on. All right, so this is also very important because we collect all this data, but how are we going to interpret all the data? We got thousands and thousands of points of water level data. So this is how we interpret it. This is from the regional supplement. And if you go to section 4.4.1 of the advanced study report, we talk about this in great detail. This is the wetland hydrology standard. This is how we determine whether the groundwater data, whether that's going to pass the groundwater standard or not. If it's a wetland, if we have wetland hydrology or not, basically. So I broke this down into 3 different parts, and the first part is the water level has to be within 14 or more consecutive days of flooding, ponding, or a water table that's 12 inches or less below the soil surface. So within 12 inches of the surface, if you have water or if there's ponding. The second part is it has to occur, the first part has to occur during the growing season. And the third part is there has to be a minimum, even if the first 2 are satisfied, there has to be a minimum frequency of 5 years in 10 or 50% probability. So those three things are really important. So I'm going to go over that just a little bit. So if you have a period of normal precipitation, if your study occurs during normal precipitation, then this third condition, the minimum frequency of 5 years in 10, is satisfied. So in this case, and I want to go over this really briefly, I'm going to go pretty fast. So just if you have any questions, let me know. So I got this information from the WETS tables at the Olympia Airport. This information is generated by the NRCS, and the data comes from the Olympia Airport. So this first column, this is the average for each month, the average precipitation. The second and third columns determine if there's normal precipitation. It gives a range around the average 30% less than or 30% more than the average. So, and this row right here is the actual precipitation from those months. And if you look at the bottom here, the actual precipitation for the months is 40.17, which is within normal precipitation. So we do have normal precipitation for the study period. And because we have normal precipitation for the study period, the 5 years in 10, 50% probability is satisfied. So going on to the growing season, there was some questions about the growing season. So I want to go over that really quickly. And this is that second condition that I mentioned earlier. So the regional supplement provides procedures for calculating the growing season on page 67. These procedures are provided in the advanced study report. So there's two field methods for determining the growing season. And these methods are to measure soil temperatures or to observe above ground growth of plant growth. So the regional supplement says either one of these two procedures can be used. You can use either one. And the regional supplement emphasizes on-site data gathering that is practical. So if it's practical to use one or the other, that's what you should use. And we just didn't think that watching plants on site would be practical because it's very time consuming and it's not very accurate. So consideration in favor, not in favor of plant watching is that different plants exhibit above ground growth at different times in Western Washington. Some plants like what they call osoberry that will show above ground growth early, and then you go to oaks, well, you have to wait to May to see above ground growth. So the above ground growth of plants, that's really variable, and it's not as precise as measuring soil temperatures. So what we did to measure soil temperatures, we thought that was a lot more practical method. So we installed a soil temperature data logger, and it was installed on the 8th of February, 2023, collecting hourly soil temperatures at 12 inches below the surface until May. And that's following the procedure precisely, exactly. This high volume of data is able to calculate the growing season to the hour it begins. Okay, so the procedure is not an approximation as much as it is a precise data-driven calculation that is much more accurate than any estimate or approximation obtained by plant watching. So also, this is really important to mention is that the definition and the definition of this procedure is very important to mention because the regional supplement states that the growing season has begun when soil temperatures are 12 inches in depth that are consistently 41 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. And then it also says that if long-term hydrologic monitoring is planned, which we've done, then soil temperature should also be monitored to ensure that it remains continuously at or above 41 degrees Fahrenheit during the monitoring period. And these are quotes from the manual. So this is our data. This graph represents our data. So this cyan color right here, that's our temperature data. And this up here in the upper left-hand corner, that's the temperature logger that we used. And this right here that I'm pointing to, if you can see that, that's the probe. The probe goes 12 inches below the surface, And you see up here, this right here is the procedure. We're following this procedure precisely. This is the procedure. And since we're monitoring groundwater, it applies that 41 degrees Fahrenheit, it remains continuously at or above 41 degrees Fahrenheit during the monitoring period. Well, this red line right here, this shows when that temperature is above 41 degrees Fahrenheit for the monitoring period. And that starts, this red line right here starts the growing season, and that starts at 17th of March, 2023 at 1 p.m. So we've just pinpointed the growing season to the hour that it began by using this methodology. And this procedure is, we followed it exactly from the Army Corps of Engineers. We have a, this is a quote up here. It's right on the actual graph right here. That's the quote for, this is the actual procedure. All right, so gonna move on from there. So it says so the regional supplement says, if you don't, or if you can't make on-site measurements, then you can approximate the growing season. And there's a procedure to approximate the growing season that averages the growing seasons from the past, and it can approximate the growing season for the year that you're looking at. So basically, with this procedure, growing season dates may be approximated by median dates, 5 years at 10 or 50% probability of 28 degrees Fahrenheit air temperatures. And this is a screenshot from the procedure from the manual. So this is a screenshot. And then this is the data that's outputted from the weather station at the Olympia Airport. So if we go up here, we want to look at 50% probability. There's 50% right there. Then it says up here 28 degrees Fahrenheit. There's 28 degrees Fahrenheit. We follow them both, and there we got a square. So we look in there, and the growing season, the average growing season starts in April, at April 14th. And we altered our dates to take climate change into account. So in this, it actually changed the average growing season date by 1 day, from the 15th to the 14th. But this is the 14th of April, and our growing season calculation is a month earlier for 2023. So we're a month earlier. If we use this approximated growing season here, if we use this one, we wouldn't have any wetlands on the southern portion of the subject property. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so I'm going to go on. So this is the summary of our hydrology results. We have different study areas, and I'll get to that in a minute. But our study area A, we only had one well, well 2, that satisfied the wetland hydrology standard. So with that, we delineated wetland B. Study area F, we have 2 wells, well 15, well 16, that satisfied the wetland hydrology standard. So we delineated wetland C. So I think it's also important to mention that if you satisfy the wetland hydrology standard, then you could just assume that you have hydric soils. And this is on page 115 from the regional supplement. And also on page 115, it says, furthermore, any soil that meets the NTCHS hydric soil technical standard, which is basically the NRCS hydric soil technical note 11, which I'm going to talk about a little bit as we go, is hydric. So technical note 11, and this is another quote from on page 115 of the regional supplement. So technical note 11 talks about well monitoring, alpha-alpha dipyridal, and the redox test. We performed all 3 of those. That's in technical note 11. If either one of these are positive, then you can assume that you have hydric soils. So I'll move on from there. I'm not going to show all of our results because I'm just trying to save on time, but here's one of the graphs that we use to determine whether our hydrology data meets the wetland hydrology standard by the Army Corps of Engineers, which is 14 consecutive days. 14 consecutive days during the growing season. So here's the growing season right here, this line, the growing season that starts on the 17th of March, 2023. That's the growing season right there. So we have a period right here where well 2 goes for 19 days, and this dashed line is 12 inches below the surface. So well 2 is above or within 12 inches of the surface for greater than 14 consecutive days, for 19 days. So well 2 satisfies the wetland hydrology standard, wells 1 and 3 doesn't. So that's how that works. I try to explain it easy enough so anyone can understand. And here's areas, this is study area C, where we have 3 wells right here, 7, 8, and 9. And none of these wells satisfy the wetland hydrology standard. And you see this one, I believe that's, well, I'm trying to squint with my eyes. I think that's 9. It's dry for the entire monitoring period. And then the blue one, I believe that's 8. It only really the water level starts to go up in April. The rest of the time it's pretty low. So these do not satisfy the wetland hydrology standard. And here's study area C with those 3 wells right there. So we place these wells in all these different study areas, and in these areas, these are areas that were basically the livestock wallow there. So these are livestock wallows, and they're flat areas, livestock wallows, and some of these areas have like some sedges and rushes in them. So we wanted to make sure that we covered this area very extensively, as much as we could. So I wanted to demonstrate this, and I thought that was really important to show how we calculated the hydrology using this method. And here's the method alpha-alpha dipyridal, and there was a little bit of conversation about this. And this method, I'll talk about it a little bit. We applied at each one of the study areas and wetland A. And here's the results right here. Each one of the study areas tested negative. Only wetland A tested positive. And this is how it looks when it's positive. It's quite a stark difference. The bright red is a positive result. And a negative result, there's no reaction at all. So we applied this through all the study areas, but the only test sample that was positive was in wetland A, and wetland A is a typical wetland, so you would expect that in wetland A. So I have some additional information about this, but I think I'm gonna go on from there unless there's any other questions on this. Here's the redox test, and the redox test that's in technical note 11, and it talks about that in great detail. And page 115 stated again, 115 in the regional supplement states that any soil that meets the NTCHS soil hydric soil technical standard, which is the NRCS hydric soil technical note 11, which this is hydric. So when this test is positive, then you have hydric soils, you have wetland soils. So this is the results of the test. So basically, all the points that are above this line are not satisfied. All these points are negative. And the points below the line, we could say that hydric soils. Now, these 2 points that are way down there, those are from wetland A. You see, wetland A is I mean, it's really hydric. It tested very positive. And these points right here, we took 3 samples at every sample location. The samples were taken at different levels. So at well 2, between 6 and 8 inches and 8 to 12 inches were positive. So, and that means that these had hydric soil, even though we were on the site and there's no visible hydric soil indicators that you would find in the earlier chapters of the manual. See, if we use the routine on-site determination method, then this wouldn't have hydric soil. It wouldn't be a wetland. We had to apply more advanced procedures in order to determine that's a wetland. Okay, so I'm gonna move right along here. So this is basically our results right here summarized. So so well 15 and 16 were positive for the wetland hydrology, and well 2 was positive. But I want to mention something right here is that all of these were negative for alpha dipyra, for the chemical. They were all negative, although we still delineated wetland B and C in that area because the hydrology was positive and the redox was positive. You only need one of them to be positive. So, and all the rest of the samples, all the tests were negative. So we did all these multiple tests, and I wanted to point that out. So moving right along. So this is wetland B. You're looking at wetland B. This is, you see this little brown spot right there? That's wetland B, that brown spot. This is from the aerial photograph. There's no water. There's really no habitat. This is a ground. This is the way it looks on the ground. So this is area A on the ground, area B, and you can see area B, area A. There's no habitat. It's completely flat. It's just basically cattle wallow right there. So that's what we have. It's completely dry. That was in February. And now what you're looking at, this right here, this little green spot, and you can see it right there. That's wetland C. So you can see there's no habitat there. I mean, it's just a little spot of green. That's all it is. There's no water. There's no. So that's what we have for wetlands. There's not much there. This is when we delineated it. So you can see that there's some soft rush in there, but not much for habitat. Soft brush also grows where there's disturbance features like we have on the site. So, and here's kind of a aerial right there. This is wetland C, and you can see it's a little bit darker in wetland C, and it's a little bit lighter outside of wetland C. But it's pretty well defined from this aerial photograph. And this is what it looks like in another aerial photograph. There's really nothing there. It's just cattle pasture. So, and then you can see the cattle. They're this is one of the flags right there. They're messing with my flags. So I wanted to point that out. I just want to give a good visual what it actually looks like on the ground. So I want to get into the mitigation plan. Now there was a question about whether we were doubling up on mitigation, but I want to point this out. I think this is really important to point out is that we're actually providing a 30-to-1 ratio for rehabilitation. And I have in front of me for rehabilitation, the required ratio is 3-to-1. Oh, sorry. The required ratio is 3-to-1, but we're providing 10 times as much mitigation. So we have a lot to play with here. So we're not doubling up on mitigation. We're providing way more mitigation than is actually required by the code. 10 times as much mitigation. So, and I appreciate that we're able to actually do that to improve this wetland beyond its existing conditions. So I want to mention that we're taking those little spots that you just saw, those little spots with no habitat, and we're taking those spots and we're creating additional wetland on wetland A. And wetland A is a category 2 wetland. So we're taking those little tiny spots that are over here in the field that you saw pictures of that really have no habitat. And I don't even think these little spots are really what the Clean Water Act intended to protect. But that's what we're protecting. And we're replacing those little spots up here on a category 2 wetland. So these are all the mitigation measures that we're implementing. And I'll try to go over it as brief as I can. We're creating high quality category 2 wetlands in favor of those little category 4 spots that you saw that weren't even wet. And rehabilitation of highly degraded wetland A. We're removing livestock from grazing in the wetland. We're eliminating invasive weeds. We're planting native western red cedar trees, and it's important. The western red cedar trees are important because when they grow, they shade out invasive weeds, and native understory vegetation have evolved to grow under western red cedar trees. So it changes the whole character of the landscape, and it will improve over the existing conditions. So, so we're going to enhance the buffer of the Category 2 wetland. We're going to plant. We're going to have wetland buffer planting. We're going to have buffer enhancement, and we're also going to provide new buffer. And this is way above existing conditions. So we're also going to have removal of trash and garbage, removal of invasive weeds, and preservation and rehabilitation of wetland A. And there's other things that we're going to do as well, like monitor and maintenance for 5 years. So I'm gonna just skip this for time. This is our grading plan. No one's ever had any questions about our grading plans. And
then can I just interject here once, Curtis, before you go to the frogs and the gophers?
okay,
I just want to point out that part of the reason for the enhanced ratio 30-to-1 versus what's required, you saw the photographs of the site, and it's highly degraded, the buffer. There is no buffer. And as I pointed out at the beginning, Mr. Rice has a lot of experience with developments in our region. They're very high quality developments. So the planting and the replanting of that buffer and those enhancements actually provides a benefit to the development because it finishes the development. Otherwise, you know, you have all this nice landscaping, a very urban, suburban looking development, and then you have a degraded wetland buffer. That just doesn't marry up very well. So Rob, he wants to finish the development. So the planting of that buffer with a larger ratio actually enhances the development, not just the habitat and water quality of the wetland. I just want to point that out because that is a huge increase in that ratio, but that's why.
it's a huge aesthetic value to the development.
Go ahead and wrap up, Curtis.
Yep, okay. All right, so I think I mentioned like the main points here. So there was also the infrastructure impacts, but I think Chris handled that pretty well. And we made some adjustments to our mitigation. So our created wetland is much larger. So I think that's really important to mention. And also, and this is our planting plan. And I won't go over that much because I think we're low on time here. And that's for the pump station. And there's some question about the 5,000 square feet for the pump station. So I want to ensure you that this area right here, since we have such a huge mitigation area, this is the mitigation for the pump station, that this is what we plan on doing with the pump station mitigation, just planting it very densely planting it with not only conifers, but understory vegetation and restoring this cattle pasture into a forested condition. So, and I think that was also really important for everyone that's involved because it's an aesthetic feature as well. It's going to look really great. So I only got a few more things. I'm going to wrap this up. The Oregon spotted frog, I think is important to mention here. And I think the most important thing I think to mention about the Oregon spotted frog, not only are we going to improve, you know, potential habitat for the Oregon spotted frog, but also the stormwater. The stormwater pond is an infiltration pond, and having an infiltration pond, it prevents flashy flooding downstream. And also, we're not going to discharge any direct stormwater from that pond into wetland A or into our wetland creation area. We do have an overflow from the farm pond, but we're not going to impact the farm pond at all. It's going to remain as potential habitat. So, and the Mazama pocket gopher, no Mazama pocket gophers mounds were identified on the site after 3 years of studies. So, any questions?
I may have a couple, Mr. Lama. Give me a minute.
Okay.
how were the perimeters of wetland B and C ultimately calculated then?
Soft rush that was growing within that area. So I just took the plants that were there, and also also there was quite a few test plots that I looked at, although the soils were pretty much contiguous throughout, and when you dug test plots, it looked pretty contiguous. But the difference was there was soft rush and sluice edge in that area that didn't exist outside of it.
The ecology's points, one of them was, and I recognize a number of points were disputed, but I think if you were to take a higher elevation analysis of their perspective was, we have 5, 6, 7 different databases, either in terms of data or aerial photography, all believing there to be wetlands through this site. So it's not one set of aerial photography, it's not one data set. It's an extraordinary number of different governmental databases that collectively and universally believe there to be wetlands across the southern portion of this site. And their point being, with that much universal belief that there are wetlands through there, why does it not hurt to take a closer look just to be sure that we won't find locations outside these 2 points? How would you respond to that?
Well, in a couple ways, and that's why I mentioned at the beginning, those agency databases are always the first step, because you have to do actual work on the ground. And those aerial photographs, historical as they may be, they're only a snapshot in time. And like I read earlier when I started the regional supplement, they address this, and it's by saying you have to be really careful using those aerial photographs, because they are a snapshot in time, and because you can have frequent flooding outside of the growing season and still be non-wetlands, or you can have flooding that doesn't last long enough to actually produce the wetland conditions. So you have to do the on-site studying. And then I think you've seen from the photographs on-site and from the high-resolution aerial photographs that were taken from drones, there was no water on the site, and it didn't. I mean, once you look at it up close, I mean, a lot of these aerial photographs by agencies are very low resolution, and what you're really looking at is the cattle wallowing areas. The cattle make, and you can see that in all over the site. I mean, even in upland areas, the cattle make indentations on the site, and there's disturbances. But we're not saying, not even for a minute, and you can read it. It's saying in the study that, I mean, there could be flooding in some areas right after a storm event, or not during the growing season. And that's pretty common. And it even says that in the core manual, and it says be very careful about looking at those aerial photographs, and you need to watch for this. And you can't look at these aerial photographs and replace groundwork and actually make a wetland determination based on these aerial photographs. It's also important to note that we spent 2 years on the site. So 2 whole years, and there was 17 site visits during that period of time. The study lasted a long time, collected thousands and thousands of data points in those areas. I think there's nothing we could have done to perform a more extensive study than we actually did on site. And aerial photographs, on-site photographs, they're in the report, and I showed some of them today. You couldn't see any water at all. All that is really important to note.
Thanks, Chris. If we can turn back to your map proposed rehabilitation, restoration, enhancement, recognizing it's a couple different terms, but if we can look at the colored map for a minute.
This one or another one?
Well, the one with the purple,
That one?
yes, that one. Thank you.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
So, Ms. Walmuck, you've answered my earlier question, which was that the lower piece, in this case, the lilac colored, lavender colored southwest area of the restoration is the 15,800 square feet that's proposed in mitigation of the pump station impacts.
Right.
I'm curious how the rest breaks down. So if that is dedicated, allocated to pump station impacts, how are all the others allocated between impacts to the wetland along 49th? And then what is allocated to the elimination of wetlands B and C?
Okay, I kind of just kind of cruised over can I see the mouse real quick? I'll go to that right here. Yeah, I went over that pretty quickly. And some of it, and I want to mention this, in our grading plan, and this may be a little confusing, so I want to make sure that this is well understood. In our grading plan, the yellow right here is the created wetland. So that's
Understood.
important to know. This magenta part, that's the grading we have to do in the buffer in order to get the grades that we need for the mitigation wetland. So we're planting this area up. That's where this comes from. So we're planting this area up densely because it's going to be disturbed because we have to grade it in order to get our elevations for the graded wetland. So I just wanted to point that out. But also, okay, so this is what we're looking at. This is for the infrastructure impacts in 49th. This is the mitigation plan for that. And I kind of try to summarize everything here. And this looks like a typo. It's supposed to be 1 to 1.5 ratio right there.
Right. And I saw that and assumed that was the case. Yeah.
Yeah, it is the case. And I apologize for that. It's supposed to say 1 to 1.5. And so for wetland B and wetland C, both of those, we're applying a 1.1 to 1.5 ratio. And for the infrastructure impacts, we're applying a 1.25 to 1 ratio. So, if you look at the wetland, this is the wetland rehabilitation. This is the wetland buffer restoration. And this is the buffer enhancement. So this is the part where we're installing 309 Western red cedar trees. And,
okay. And let me stop you for a second. This is the point that's been bugging me.
okay.
It's a small point, but you identify new wetland buffer at 15,800 square feet as applicable to mitigation to wetlands B, C, and A, but you've already allocated that to the mitigation for the storm or for the pump station.
Oh,
and so,
okay.
That's where I'm having problem of a double allocation of new wetland buffer, which has already been allocated for one purpose and now shows up on this table as being allocated for these purposes.
That's actually extra. That was some area that was left over that we just allocated to the buffer. It's not really
the exact same square footage as what's shown on the pump station. It's 15,802 square feet.
Yeah, I understand it's the same square footage and it's the same area, but we went way over the mitigation ratios. So this is going over the mitigation ratios. This is an area, this new wetland buffer right there, that we didn't have to, and for the infrastructure, we didn't have to allocate that. We just
okay. So if I were to ignore that, you would prefer that I simply ignore that on your column?
If you ignore that, then in this one, it probably would make more sense because that's extra mitigation that wasn't required under the code.
All
so
right.
I hope that explains it.
It does. Okay. Just give me 1 second.
Right.
No, Ms. Wallenbach, I think that concludes my questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, with that, we have one more expert, and Chloe McIntyre is going to talk very briefly about stormwater, high level.
Okay, Ms. McIntyre, let me cut to the chase. I've read your report. I understand it. You don't need to tell it to me again. But what I want to know is, or better understand, about impacts to wetland hydrology. So, wetlands can be impacted in one of two ways, right? They can be flooded, or they can be tainted, I should say, by stormwaters, either impacting, adding to their hydrology or adding to them contaminants or unwanted waters, or just the reverse can happen, that stormwater can be denied wetlands that is important to their hydrology. So in this case, stress has been made on the fact that your stormwater system will remain out of wetland A except for impacts along 49th Street, and that all stormwater associated with the site itself will go to the infiltration system and not go to the wetland. My question is, are we impacting the hydrology of wetland A by denying it the waters from stormwater?
No, we will not be. So the way that stormwater here will work is that the water is all going to be conveyed to onsite infiltration, or a majority of the onsite runoff will be conveyed to an onsite infiltration pond. And then the water from that pond will infiltrate into the groundwater aquifer beneath the pond. That aquifer is hydraulically tied to this wetland, so that water still enters the wetland, but it does so in a more natural pace through the substrate to that wetland rather than flash flooding surface flow directly to the wetland.
Okay, so there's sufficient connectivity
Correct.
between the stormwater system and the wetland to assure hydrology.
Correct.
Okay. That was the one question I had of you. Yeah, is there anything else about your stormwater engineering that you would like to speak to?
I don't know that I really have a lot that I want to go over in detail. I know that there was a comment earlier about the pond doubling as an active rec space, and so this is an infiltration pond. Stormwater runoff will be conveyed to the pond and it will infiltrate fairly rapidly, meaning it will be dry most of the year. It will have some water shortly after precipitation events, and then it will be dry otherwise. So it can double as active recreation. Other than that, I do not have anything to add.
No. And again, I've looked at your report thoroughly. I understand what it says. You to testify as to what it says won't add to what I'm thinking about. So again, I'm not trying to be rude in any way. I'm just not needing to hear it a second time. So.
I don't mind not talking about it. It's fine by me.
Thank you. Mr. Pantier, we've gone through your identified witnesses. Do you wish to make presentation by anyone else?
No, I think that concludes our presentation for now. I think we can proceed to the next level, and we'll circle back when the time's right.
Okay, just a reminder to both city staff as well as to the applicant that this process has 3 separate presentations. Again, city staff, the applicant, and then public comment. But following public comment, there will be the opportunity, perhaps the expectation of both the city and the applicant to respond to that comment. So that response period will come later. So with that, let's turn then to public comment. And Alex, is there someone serving as host who might serve as the one managing public comment?
Tammy Merriman is in the Sunset Room and will be managing public comment in person. I would be happy to manage the attendees who are online, whatever order you would like to take them in.
I don't have a preference. I think the people who have been waiting in the city hall may have earned the right based upon that effort. So let's turn to Ms. Merriman. Ms. Merriman, if you could manage the flow of those wishing to be heard, and if either you or they will identify themselves first, and then we'll have them individually sworn. So go ahead.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Scheidmeier. Can you hear me?
Hear you very well.
First of all, okay, thanks. Before we start, I have a very unusual request. We had a couple that were here and that were unable to stay. They had to go for physical physical reasons and the fact that they had a medication timing treatments that they had to leave and they could not stay. They asked if I would share a message. May I do that?
That's fine, please.
Okay, thank you.
If you can identify who they have, Ms. Mayor, who?
I will. They are James Giovannini and Pamela Calloway. They
And
relayed
so,
to me,
I'm sorry, Ms. Merriman, James's last name, how would you spell that?
Giov as in Victor, Annini.
Okay. And Tamela, is that Tamela?
Pamela with a P,
P.
Pamela.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm having a little, I thought I was hearing you quite well, but I'm not as well as I thought. And her last name?
Callaway, Callaway.
Okay. And do they have a common position or does each one have their own?
They live in the same home. They live on the piece of property that is between the wetland and the entrance on 49. They're very concerned. They were not aware of all the documents that have been referred to in the testimony that they heard before they had to leave. They're very concerned of how the development will impact their home and their property specifically. And they have reached out to the city in the past and were unsuccessful. They want to be able to speak with someone who can explain to them what is going on.
Okay. Did they leave you with a written statement or simply some expressed beliefs?
They said that to me in the hallway. I tried to write down what they expressed.
Okay, all right. With that, certainly I've taken those notes. And with that, let's proceed then with those who are present who wish to be heard.
I will go down the list, the sign-in sheet first. Don Wakefield.
He's hearing that.
Has left. Melinda and Chris Gordon. Lance, is it Brender? We had a lot of folks leave, I'm sorry. Ramona and Gary Fultz.
Oh, I'm going to slow you down just a little bit so that my notes are accurate. So Mr. and Ms. Gordon signed but have left, and then the next person who had signed and left
Is Lance Brender.
and how's that spelled?
Brender.
Okay. And then the next on your list.
I have Ramona and Gary Fultz. I believe Ramona is here beside me.
And how's the last name spelled?
Fultz.
Z, okay. And so I see both Mr. and Mrs. Fultz present. Are you both wishing to be heard? Was that a yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so if so, let's have you both sworn. Do you both swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yeah.
Go ahead in whichever order you prefer.
Well, first of all, I have a complaint for the city of Tumwater after hearing that they've been working on this for 3 years. Multiple processes. Large amount of money. And that we only learned about the development the end of October of 24. So I feel like the tax-paying citizens are an afterthought and that we are just here as a formality and that all these procedures that apply to us are a formality that we are irrelevant. So I'm very unhappy, and I think somehow there needs to be community connection with these kinds of proposals. So you could say I'm incensed. I have a couple comments about the development. I made a whole list of questions earlier with the,
Let me interrupt you just for a second, Ms. Foltz. I tried to not do that. It's an awfully rude thing to do. But sometimes I need to improve what may happen next. And so if you do have questions, and if others do, this is for your benefit and others, that what I'll ask you to do is to give those questions to me. I will then decide who I want to ask to respond to them. So I'll serve as the traffic cop for your questions. And so instead of you asking them directly, just give the question to me. I'll then come back to it later on. And if by chance I forget, which I try really hard not to, well, then just let Ms. Merriman know that my question wasn't posed, and I'll get back to it. So go ahead.
I think this is a general issue and probably for more than myself and my husband, but there are other community members that probably feel the same. And taxpayers, you know, we pay the bills and yet we're coming in very late. And so I'd like to see some kind of a change in the procedures that we can be advised of these development proposals much earlier on than 3 years in advance, when everything seems to be predetermined and pre-decided. And so one of the objections I have to where it is and what it is that the definition of urban sprawl is the spreading of urban developments such as houses and shopping centers on undeveloped land near a city. Well, our whole area is rural. Prior to even our development, it's obvious that it was all forest and farmland. This is the state's Growth Management Act is supposed to alleviate urban sprawl. This development actually expands it into a rural farmland area. I could support it if it was closer to what's considered our city center. And even support it if we had more than 2-lane roads. We have to go miles to find a 4-lane road. And so you're going to bring in perhaps 400 or 500 more cars. One of those concerns related to that is the wildfire danger and evacuations. I don't know that we could survive as it is trying to evacuate in the area where we live on 2-lane roads without bringing approximately 400 or 500 more cars and equivalent people or more. I don't know how many they expect to bring. Another's a concern about the school and the congestion. And as it is, the parents park on our easement. We have 2 entrances / exits. We can't see around the parked cars. It's been documented with the school district and the city of Tumwater. And so you're going to bring on 58th, we're on Black Lake Belmore. So you're going to bring on 58th Lane, 78 or 79 more cars coming out that exit or into it in the PM rush hour. So in the morning, they're probably coming out. In the afternoon, they're coming in. We have a congestion problem, a visibility problem as it is. And the visibility problem is very dear to me. I lost a brother at the young age of 21 with a visibility problem on a highway due to a logging truck driver crossing a center lane because someone was parked where they shouldn't be parked beside the road. So we constantly face a visibility problem getting in, especially out of our neighborhood. So there are multiple concerns I have about this project, and a number of them listed earlier that I won't go into all. But they were documented with the city of Tumwater. But those are two main ones I want to bring up today. I feel like the 58th lane should not be allowed to be an entrance / exit. It's okay if they want to have a sidewalk for the kids, but our Black Lake Belmore Road is not appropriate infrastructure for that entrance exit. They ought to take it somewhere else. You've talked about extending another entrance exit from that 58th lane. If this goes through, that would be a recommendation I would have, although I'm opposed to the whole thing. Terry, do you have something to say?
I have a traffic question. Black Lake Belmore Road has, and 49th Street, it's a three-way stop, which I've never seen before, with the southbound Black Lake Belmore cars not having to stop. I'm curious as to whether there's any plan to mitigate that. Maybe Mr. Van Aken can let me know about that.
Okay, I'll come back to that question, Ms. Paul. Anything else?
That's on 49th, up where the entrance exit is going to be to this project. Is there going to be any construction to that area with the railroad tracks? They're pretty rough now when you go over them. I'm just curious if that's going to be fixed. And it's related to, I believe you said earlier, it was 100 feet before you get into that entrance as you come around the corner onto 49th. Is the speed limit still going to be 40 miles an hour around there with no left turn lane going into that development? Seems pretty dangerous to me. I think those are my questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll come back to those when all public testimony is completed. Okay, thank you, folks.
All right, the next name on the list is Jay, thank you, Jay and Carol.
Webster.
Pardon?
Webster.
Webster, thank you so much.
So you must be Carol.
I am.
All right. Let's have you sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead.
The concern that I have is they talked about the runoff in the water, living in that area along Black Lake Belmore and south of 49th. It's constant flooding during rain seasons, and we experienced it, you know, this last couple months where the water comes across the road, and this government had to put out signs that said water across road. It impedes our ability to go across, and the field at the bottom, which would be to the west of what they're talking about with the wetlands and everything, they're like a lake. They have ducks and everything that swim on them during that time. And with the idea of the amount of impervious surface that's getting put up on the hill, how much more water is going to come down into that area and block the road with the water. It's a recurring event during rainy seasons. And from what I've heard on the studies, it didn't sound like a lot of that. The studies were done during that time. So that was the only concern that that's one of the concerns that worries us with all of that there.
I'll turn that into a question, Ms. Webster, and I'll pose that to the applicant stormwater person. So
Okay, thank you. That's the biggest concern I had, other than eliminating wetlands.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Guy Bogdanovich?
Hello, I'm Guy Bogdanovich. I live at 3827 58th Lane. The proud owner of the 2.45 acres right on the corner of 58th Lane and Black Lake Belmore Road.
Mr. Bogdanovich, are you an attorney?
Retired, happily
Retired.
retired, yes.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Scheibmeyer. I think we've probably spoken a few times over the years.
We have.
I was a proud partner of Chloe's mom, Elizabeth McIntyre, for about 20 years of my career.
Yes, it goes back a few years, but I do recognize you. So nice to see you. So let's have
As
you
well.
sworn. Let's have you sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead.
And I guess my question and concern has to do with the increase in traffic on 58th Lane Southwest. I appreciated your observation, Mr. Scheibmeyer, that just looking at the logistics of it, that you were talking about the ratio of expected traffic that was going to go in and out of 49th as opposed to 58th. And I can tell you in the nearly, well, a little over 4 years now since I've been retired and on my property almost every day and a lot of the evenings, I've seen how just the 4 houses that currently exist and have since I moved in there in March of '92, how much traffic that generates between the occupants of those 4 homes, their family, their friends, delivery trucks and whatnot. I'm wondering if there's any provision for anything other than just a stop sign for traffic at the end of 58th Lane that's going to have to sit there for probably a good amount of time at different times of the year for traffic that's traveling up and down Black Lake Belmore Road. There's a very popular county park, Kennydale Park, that's just I guess it would be south of Black Lake Elementary. They have a nice property that includes lakefront swimming area, picnic, and then there's a boat launch, heavily used boat launch just south of that. And all of that generates in the summertime, especially obviously a lot of boat and trailer traffic, camper trailers, users of the park. And I know you guys have all the daily traffic volumes, I'm sure, on the roads, but I just, having experienced this travel off of Black Lake, off of 58th Lane onto Black Lake Belmore for the 33 years I've been there, I'm wondering if there's been any consideration to anything other than a stop sign and all, if as much traffic as I believe may come out that end of the development, if there's going to be any provision for at least a turn lane either on Black Lake Belmore Road or 58th Lane Southwest.
I'll add that to the list of questions to pose back to the traffic engineer.
I won't tell you what I think about losing the pasture and watching the cows off the front porch. I understand progress.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'll let you do that.
Okay, Pat and Lois?
Yes.
Is it Grayson? Grayson, thank you.
And how do I spell that?
Greisen.
I thought so. I believe that you've provided written comments in advance as well, have you not?
I haven't.
No.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
wish I had.
I'm confusing the name with someone else's comments I read. I apologize. Do both of you expect to testify tonight?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So if so, let's have you both sworn. Do both of you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
All right. Whoever wants to go first, go ahead.
I have a couple concerns. First off, I know a lot of the neighbors, I'm on 58th Lane, so it does impact us a lot. But one of the things that all the neighborhoods are worried about is the school. And it's already full of portables. How is it going to support more kids? Because those homes are going to have kids. And so that's a concern. Has that really been studied? The other thing is the pasture is a wetland. I have pictures to prove it. We do have wildlife that is out there when it's wet. We have had golden eagles. We've had bald eagles. We have had blue herons in the winter. That is just normal out there. What are some of the other, there's been quite a few different birds. Oh, and the vultures, that they like to just live right out there. And yes, we have geese and ducks, which some people consider a problem. However, the eagles love them because we've sat on our porch and watched them get packed off. And it's quite interesting to watch. But those are just a couple things that really concern me. The other thing is the intersection at 49th and Black Lake Belmore. He said something about there's only been 3 collisions in 4 years. There's a few of us that laughed in this room when he said that. There is often broken glass down there from fender benders all the time. People don't know when they're supposed to stop. They don't understand the free thoroughfare. My brother comes to visit quite often. He's like, how in the world are you guys going to have more traffic down there with just a turn lane added is not going to fix it. So those are my concerns. Just 3.
And Mr. Grayson?
Yes, I'd like to add to the comment that Guy gave about the traffic on Black Lake Belmore Road, that the southbound lanes, when school is starting in the morning and when it's getting out, is back clear up past 58th Lane and is solid for probably a good hour or more during those 2 time periods, the starting and the getting out of school.
Anything else?
I did think of one other thing. Our neighbor who isn't here tonight, but he did talk with somebody in Tumwater. I don't know which one of you guys. And we were told also on 58th Lane, it's not just going to be traffic. They're also those people in that development are going to be allowed to park on 58th Lane.
That is true.
With all their extra cars.
Yes. The design of it is for parking on all proposed streets.
Right.
Anything else?
Yeah, does anybody want to buy my house?
Well, thank you, folks.
Okay, thank you.
Did we catch everybody? I do have a question for you. If I have those same concerns, do I have to say that so you have not people that everything you teach them?
The audience, I have a member of the audience that asked if they want to confirm or agree with statements. Do they need to say it separately?
It's fine to do that. I'm not going to bring people back up a second time though. So I have no doubt that these comments are commonly shared. So that's a bit of a given to me. I was going to defer relaying these questions until I had heard from everybody, but that makes me keep an audience in attendance that may otherwise want to leave. And so I'm going to go through the questions posed so far before I turn to those who are appearing remotely that may want to testify, and then we'll come back to them. So,
Mr. Hearing Examiner, Heather had a quick question.
Sure, Ms. Burgess.
Thanks, Mr. Examiner. I was just gonna, before you get into your questions, which I'm happy to have you summarize, it may be that at the conclusion of our opportunity to respond to everything, that we may be asking for a brief amount of time to provide you written responses to some of these issues. And so I just wanted to raise that possibility before you. I've been taking detailed notes as well. So I just wanted to raise that possibility. I realize it's not as immediately satisfying to the members of the public who are present, but we're also happy to provide our responses to the questions to those who are in attendance.
Well, let me toss that one back over the fence. Would you prefer that opportunity over individualized questioning? Are you seeing a situation where you may want to have a collective response, formal response, as opposed to simply individual questions being answered on a question by question basis? What does the applicant have a request to make at this time?
Yes, I would request comprehensive response to the public comments.
I'm sorry, you broke up halfway through that, and
Okay.
it affected what was said. So go ahead again.
Can you hear me now? It's a fatal, fatal flaw. Okay. What I was going to ask Mr. Examiner is, yes, I think the response to the public comments. Did you lose me again?
At the very same point in time.
I'm looking at my Wi-Fi signal and it looks good, so I'm not sure what to trust. I'm going to turn my camera off and maybe hopefully that will cure the defect.
Sure. It's curious how it happened exactly at the same moment in time, both times, but
that not intentional on my part. Yes, the applicant would request the opportunity to provide a comprehensive written response to the public comments. There is some overlap, there's some text, and there's some references that I think would be best provided in writing as opposed to.
Okay, so I'm gonna, I guess, advance to that. I just so that I don't leave people hanging, I'm gonna go ahead and I will grant both the applicant and the city an opportunity for more collective response that goes beyond tonight. And so those who are present, just to be alerted that I'm not going to get everyone's answers this evening. Instead, I'm going to seek out a little more thoughtful, complete, intelligent ones from the parties. I think that's beneficial to all. I see the benefit of the applicant seeking that and of me granting that. So for what it's worth, and we haven't completed the process, but I want to move this along. I don't want to give this a lot of time, but I'm going to go ahead and allow until next Monday, 5 o'clock for responses, and I'll ask both the applicant and the city to be paying close attention to these questions that have been asked so that their responses are as comprehensive as they can be. So again, at that point, I'll then complete the hearing and then begin to render my decision. But that way we're moving along, but we allow a little bit of time for some thoughtful responses. So with that in mind, let's go on with our public comment. And so, Mr. Baruch, let's turn now to you for those who are appearing remotely. And who do you show as potentially wanting to testify?
Yes, I've got first on my list, I think it's in alphabetical order. So not in, who it was here first or anything like that, but Bonnie Blessing. And I'll allow to talk. And if Bonnie wants to unmute and there we go.
I show her on the screen. She appears to be unmuted. Good evening, Ms. Blessing. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me, please?
I can very well. Thank you. So let's have you sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
I have received 2 previous written comments from you, and I understand a third is awaiting me. So just not that in any way should discourage you from saying the same things, but just so that you're aware, I have carefully reviewed your previous written testimony. So go ahead.
Hey, I want to give kudos to Curtis Wambach for doing the hydrologic studies. They're really interesting, and the wetland mitigation there up towards the north. My concern is like whether the separation needed between the surface water and the groundwater. I thought Alex said they'd do more studies to find out, to make sure there's separation between the surface water and the groundwater. I guess my main concern stems from whether the stormwater manual has appropriate guidance for that. My understanding is that it allows improvement of downstream conveyances. And all I want to hear is that, or my question is whether there'd be any relationship, things that can like lower groundwater, include groundwater pumping and draining of nearby marshes. And my main concern, as I think everybody knows, is whether there'd be any need to drain the marsh to the southeast to make sure that the water table under there is deep enough, or is low enough. I mean, adding the impervious surface might send, to get that separation, my concern is will there be any need to drain or adjust the hydrology in the marsh to the southeast? I found spotted frogs down there a long time ago. They lay eggs in very shallow water and in traditional places, and I just don't want to see them lose those traditional places. And that is the end of my comment. Thank you.
So sometimes if I paraphrase, I can express either that I was tracking or that I'm not very intelligent.
Oh, no.
It varies wildly. But if I was to paraphrase, you wish to better understand whether sending storm water to the northwest will potentially harm hydrology of wetlands to the southeast?
No. My concern is that I believe there needs to be a separation between like the bottom of the stormwater ponds and the groundwater height under the whole development, right? Under the whole 50 acres or whatever. I believe that there needs to be that separation. And I'd like to see wetlands to the southeast protected from hydrologic that are off-site. They're off-site wetlands, sir. They're off-site, but they're off-site wetlands about 600 or more feet to the southeast of this parcel. And the stormwater manual does allow improvement of off-site conveyances, I believe, and I would like to get that addressed because I don't want to see any changes to the hydrology in the marshes that are off-site or to the southeast that are off-site, because that has special habitat for a listed species.
And I thank you. Thanks for the clarification. I did understand that you were referring to off-site wetlands to the southeast. I just I think your question's been well placed enough that I believe both the city and the applicant should be able to respond. So
great. I look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Ms. Blessing?
No.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the list, I have David Stauffer. Remote.
Hello, this is Dave.
Hi, Mr. Stauffer. I can hear you, and you are obviously unmuted. Let's first have you sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I recall you having written public comments earlier. I believe you to be the property owner to the south. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm at the end of 58th Lane at the cul-de-sac where you were talking about possibly poking through to the property to the east.
Yes.
There's not enough room between my house and the center line of 58th Lane to allow for the road to poke all the way through. That's a sidebar only because you mentioned it earlier in the evening.
I'm sorry, Mr. Word. It's getting late and sometimes discussions get underway and I suddenly cannot recall whether I've had someone sworn or not. Did I have you sworn?
Yes, I think so. Just now.
I thought so, but you were quick in your presentation and I just could not remember. So with all that, I've sort of thrown you off your stride, perhaps. I apologize if I have. If there's other things you would like to say, go ahead.
Yes, there is. My concern is on a more bigger picture, and that is that between Little Rock Road and Black Lake Belmore 49th intersection, I think there's been about at least six major developments of hundreds of homes added to the community, which is fine. I am okay with growth, but there are many choke points along the roads of 70th to Kershaw to 66th to Belmore, 49th over to Black Lake Boulevard. There are many choke points that are never going to be improved. When I say never, surely that's a long time, and it's never is a long way out. I agree that there may be someday in the future, but right now there are spots along those routes that have swamp on both sides of the road, and you're not going to get a private individual to pay to widen the road enough for a walking path or a bicycle trail, or even enough room to put two cars. Right now, Black Lake Belmore is barely wide enough for two cars. And if you're walking on that road, which many people do, I've swerved around them many times, they'll take a step to the right and fall into the ditch. With you adding another additional 400 cars with this development, what are you going to do about all the choke points along the roads between Little Rock Road and Black Lake Boulevard over on the end of the lake? There is just too much traffic, and you're doing nothing to do to mitigate the traffic flow in those choke points along there, because nobody in the private sector is going to improve those roads. You can't we pay tax dollars, these 200 or 180 new homes, and every one of the other developments are paying taxes to have infrastructure, to have bus travel, to have police, to have fire in the city limits, and we don't have any of it out here, and you have no plans to increase the road width on Black Lake Belmore Road. It's just unacceptable, and that's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Stowe.
Mr. Examiner, this is Heather. I was trying, I'm a pretty good typist, but I was trying to capture the list of all the roads that Mr. Stouffer was listing where his choke points were. I had 70th, I had Kearsop, I had 49th over to Black Lake Boulevard. Did I miss a road?
Repeat it. Let me repeat them for you.
Thank you, sir.
Little Rock Road
Okay.
and 70th is the same as Little Rock Road in Israel. Israel goes to the east of Little Rock. 70th goes to the west of Little Rock. You go up 70th until it turns a 90-degree turn for Kersop. Kersop goes over and to your left turn onto 66th, and 66th goes up to Black Lake Belmore Road, which you turn a right on, and rights down to 49th, where there's a three-way stop that's ridiculous that everybody knows except for the city, apparently. And then you go over to Black Lake Boulevard at the end of the lake. That's the main trail from west side Olympia to Tumwater. Everybody travels it. And it's had at least 7 major developments with over 100 homes each, at least 100. I haven't gone and done the math because I don't know where I could go to count those developments, but there's a lot of homes that's been added, and there's choke points all along there where there's nobody going to increase the road width and give a proper clearance for people walking or riding a bike or even driving 2 cars. And that's my concern.
I really appreciate, Mr. Examiner, you letting Mr. Stouffer clarify that so we get it right. Thanks so much.
Sure, thank you. And so, Alex, do you show additional witnesses?
Yes, I do. Next, Beth McIntyre.
She's not showing on my screen.
Okay. If she doesn't want to talk, that's fine. I can move on to the next.
Okay.
I have a phone number as well, but it does not have a name associated with it.
And what is the number?
206. It starts with 206. I guess I'll open that up to see if that person wants to speak.
Right, I was just seeing if you can inquire of them if, or one way or another, if they do wish to be heard and who they might be.
Yep, they're available to speak right now if they would like. But if not, I can move on to the next.
Are you getting any response?
No, no response.
Okay.
Okay. Next would be Esther Cronenberg.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Hi. I'm speaking. I swear I do.
Okay, I'll get to that in a second, but I don't have your name on the screen, but I do recall you having given written comments before.
That's right.
Can you give the spelling of your last name?
Yeah. Kronenberg.
Okay. So Ms. Cronenberg, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And again, I note your prior written testimony, not to discourage you from giving it again, but just to let you know that I have reviewed that testimony already. So go ahead.
It's a little modified, but yeah, forgive me if it's a little formal, but I'm speaking on behalf of the Clean Black Lake Alliance. We're a citizens nonprofit interested in preserving the health of the Black Lake Basin. We have several concerns about the project related to water quality and wildlife habitat, and the drastic change in character it will bring to this rural area. The addition of 184 houses and almost 1,800 car trips a day will add a significant burden of stormwater pollution to an already degraded water body and its tributaries, which provide habitat for federally endangered species. Ecology has twice raised concerns about the methodology and data used to delineate wetlands on the property, saying that the wetlands appeared to be significantly more extensive, and included those maps, and questions why those impacts to these two wetlands couldn't be avoided. And the response from the consultant was that the applicant's objective would not be accomplished. Just shows us the consultant has been hired to achieve those desired results that the applicant wants, and is not an impartial biologist as ecology is. As ecology stated, a desire to develop a certain number of units is not a demonstration of need. Applicant's response to this was simply that project engineers will address it. The SEPA law includes several provisions requiring the lead agency to consider a proposal's impacts on endangered and threatened species or their habitat, and to consider the adverse impacts of the project in other locations and the cumulative impacts of this proposal. If from everything that's been submitted, I don't see any analysis of whether the change in water levels will affect the Oregon spotted frogs. I don't see any analysis Tumwater has made of the entire basin area at full build out, you know, instead of piecemealing each development and saying this one's okay, there's been no analysis of what is happening to the entire Black Lake Basin if it's all built out. And no analysis of the impacts of the loss of trees, and no analysis of whether impacts of, you know, fixing downstream conveyances due to all the paving could cause adverse cumulative effects. The applicant says the development won't be releasing more stormwater to downstream conveyance systems, but can we be sure of that if ecology is telling us that the wetlands are significantly more extensive on the site as claimed? And we hear from people in the neighborhood that there's marshland and swamp and water over the road even now. There's also a hazardous waste site close to one of the culverts of this project. Frank's Place was listed by Ecology on its list of sites with suspected contaminated groundwater and contaminated with lead, metals, petroleum, and many unknown substances that were dumped there from drums, solid waste, junk vehicles, and other hazardous materials. And the wetland on that site has been graded and filled with this solid waste and wood debris and soil. Has Tumwater considered this hazardous site in any assessment of the cumulative impacts to the Black Lake Basin? For me, it seems clear it has not considered the impacts on the entire watershed and the endangered species that are hanging on by a thread that live in the UGA in its assessment of this proposal, along with the other ongoing projects in this rural area. At the least, an assessment of the impacts of groundwater withdrawal on seasonally flooded areas and marshes necessary for threatened wildlife habitat and for the possibility of further polluted runoff reaching Black Lake should be done. Ecology has also recommended another site visit. Clean Black Lake Alliance thinks it's time that the city of Fillmore fulfill its legal and ethical responsibility to protect the natural resources and wildlife under its jurisdiction. This project should be reviewed by an EIS, as well as the several other proposed and ongoing developments in the Black Lake Basin. We cannot continue to build on top of our watershed from which we get all our drinking water without serious consequences for the future. We highly recommend that this project have an EIS and that the whole Black Lake Basin be subject to an EIS before any more development occurs there. Thanks.
Thanks. I don't often respond to comments, but sometimes it's important to clarify certain points. Most of what you've sought, Ms. Cronenberg, I cannot do. I do not have the authority to reconsider the SEPA determination or to impose an EIS. The SEPA determination had an appeal period that came and went without anyone seeking an appeal of that determination. Once that happened, I am no longer allowed to consider the SEPA determination or alter it. And so that portion of this process is fixed for purposes of my consideration, and I'm not in a legal position to change that. So I'm not trying to pick on your testimony. I'm just trying to clarify a very important legal fact so that there's transparency in my decision-making process. I hope that's understood.
Yeah, thank you.
Certainly.
But here, the city planner is here and he can hear it.
He nods his head.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Brook, do you have others?
Yes, there are 5 or 6 more on the list. We'll see if any want to speak. Next is Ginny Bodenhammer.
She's not showing on my screen.
Yep, she has the ability to speak, but it does not look like they're unmuting. So I'll move on to the next. Helena Rice is the next person. And if Helena wants to speak, you can unmute. If not, I'll move on to the next. Okay. Next would be Jerome from the Jolt News. I'm guessing they're here to report on it, but it's always good to double check. All right, I'll move on to the next person. Lori Batten is the next on the list. Lori, if you would like to unmute, if you have any comments. Okay, moving on to the next person. Mark Quimby is the next on the list. Mark, you have the ability to unmute now if you'd like to speak. Okay, moving on to the next person. Mike Brewer is next on the list. And Mike, if you would like to speak, please unmute. Okay, moving on to the last person on the list, Robert. Robert, if you'd like to speak, you can unmute now. Oh, I did see one other person pop onto the list a moment ago, Betsy Norton. And I just made it available to speak.
Hi, can you
Betsy,
hear me?
oh, yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I may have missed a few things. I had to leave and come back. Um,
So let me slow you down, Ms. Norton. This is the hearing
Okay.
examiner. Before you get underway, let's have you first sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I would just, my aim is, I am concerned with biodiversity, habitat loss, and the failure of water resources management to maintain quantity and quality to support ecosystems, wildlife, and us. In the application packet, Tumwater states that after all the back and forth between the applicant's environmental consultant and the Washington Department of Ecology, there was never a formal resolution. It concerns me that the hearing examiner would make a decision and the staff would recommend one without a final resolution from ecology. So I would just urge you to try and get that before a decision is reached. Secondly, Vista View will be removing the ecosystem function of the underground aquifer recharge levels 1 and 2. Is anyone at Tumwater looking at the cumulative long-term impacts on groundwater levels and drinking water availability for the city residents as a result of incrementally reducing this recharge function every time you have a development request? Because I think that this is a growing problem. Thirdly, the application states that 55% of the development will be impervious surface, a calculation which I believe must include the area under Wetland A. Wetland A comprises a significant part of the total area in the northwest corner. My question is, does the remaining non-Wetland A area of the developed parcel meet the 60% impervious surface calculation limit or not? Because I think there's a way that you can meet the letter of the law on this and not the intent. And I think the intent is important. And then finally, just, I think you mentioned this earlier, Mr. Hearing Examiner, but I don't know for sure exactly what was covered there, but has Tumwater analyzed this development in terms of the likely cumulative impact of all of these developments like this in this area on stormwater volume in the neighborhood and the likely impacts downstream of those, including the cumulative effect of all the new impervious surface, the cumulative loss of stormwater absorption ability because you're paving over the prairie lands and the grasslands, and the cumulative loss of wetlands and wildlife habitat to the populations that are there. And then finally, the cumulative impacts of the above actions combined with more extreme rain events from global warming, which will affect all of the developments at the same time. I hope that Tumwater will think about these cumulative impacts of the incremental decisions you're making, including this exception that's possible, and reconsider if you really want to weaken the environmental protections and considerations for wetlands at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Ms. Brooke, anyone else?
No, that was it. I will say that Ms. Norton did send those comments via email as well to myself, since she wasn't sure if she was going to be able to jump back on after her other or in between being on earlier and a meeting in between. So I can forward those to everybody after we're done with the meeting, and that can be Exhibit 11 and then a letter once I figure out what letter we're on again.
Okay, once you confirm which letter, let me know when you send that to identify the exhibit number as well.
Yes, I will.
I'm hoping we're at 11, for what it's worth, I'm hoping we're at 11G.
That sounds about right.
Okay.
Okay, all right, thank you. So rather than come back to either the city staff or the applicant, both of which are allowed opportunities to respond, as discussed a bit earlier, I'm going to adjourn the hearing to allow them to do so in writing and to do that by Monday evening at 5:00 p.m. At which time I'll then consider the hearing complete and then begin working on my decision. In advance of that, I know most people who have participated have left. It's late there. I get that. I do apologize for the length of the hearing for many. But I do want to thank all those, both who have remained and who have left, for their diligence in being part of this process, taking the time, the trouble, going to the inconvenience of participating and being heard tonight. I much appreciate that input, and I will certainly try to reciprocate by just as earnest an effort in rendering a decision. I do want to also apologize for my informal dress. I'm on vacation. This happened the very same thing last year in Tumwater, where I got to experience an evening on Kauai conducting a hearing, but there are worse places to hold a public hearing. I do, again, apologize for my informal attire, but it's a lot sooner in the evening for me than it is for the rest of you. So there's that. With that, I don't think we have anything else to address tonight. Mr. Baruch, Ms. Burgess, anything else that either one of you have?
No, not at this time. From the city, we'll work on responses and kind of discuss with the applicant how to divide up some of the responses so we're not duplicating efforts, and can ensure complete responses get back to you by February 3rd, Monday at 5 p.m.
All right, that'll be what's expected. And with that, I want to thank everyone, and we are adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you very much.